You ready? Okay. Good evening, and welcome to our February 7th, 2024 Board of County Commissioners meeting for Douglas County. This is our business meeting. We do have paper copies available of our agenda right by the coffee cups there. Feel free to pick one up and follow along if you'd like to. For tonight's meeting, we'll first have our consent agenda, which includes a great many of our minutes and a total of 11 items. After that, we'll have general public comment. So we welcome general public comment for addressing any issue that's not on today's agenda, but otherwise related to county business. Given our limited time and the need to have orderly and efficient meeting, we apply certain rules to public comment. We do our best to enforce the rules consistently and without regard to the point of view expressed by the speaker. And those are, first, that each speaker is limited to a total of 3 minutes of speaking time. However, we accept public comment of any length in writing, and we had a significant number of those for tonight's meeting. 2, individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers. 3, all comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. And 4, we reserve the right to mute any speaker whose comments are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent. Please, as you do public comment, give us your full name and address for our meeting minutes and address your comments up here to the Commission. Please know that comments received by the Commission during our meetings do not necessarily represent the views of Douglas County government, but we value the input. We don't usually respond to general public comment on the spot, but if you'll leave your contact information with county staff, we will try and get specific questions answered. After general public comment, we'll move into our regular agenda, and for each action item, we'll hear from staff or the applicant, followed by questions from the Commission, and then open that item up for public comment relevant on that item. Once public comment is closed, then we'll bring that item back to the Commission for further discussion and a vote. Lastly, the recording of this meeting will be available on the county's YouTube page and website. So with that, we will move into our consent agenda, and I'll first ask commissioners, are there any items you would like to have pulled from our consent agenda? Nope. I'll ask the public, are there any items from the consent agenda that the public would like to remove for further discussion? Seeing none in person. Do we have someone, Sarah? Okay, thank you. With that, I would accept a motion for the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 11.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Motion passes. So now we'll have general public comment. If you've come to talk about anything that's on our regular agenda, we'll ask you to hold those comments until that agenda item. But otherwise, we are open for general public comment. If you'd like to come forward, sign in, and give us 3 minutes. So anyone for general public comment? Is there anyone online? Okay.
We're going to move Sherilyn Wells into the panel. Sherilyn, you're in the panel. You can come off mute and provide public comment.
I know that you give some funding to the Lawrence Community Shelter, and I know they've taken on new responsibilities and expanded services in kind of expanded fashion. Something that really concerned me was this Sunday, and the transportation issues have not been figured out on Sunday well, is that people were all except the 25 people that get to stay there were turned out into a pouring rain. A friend of mine said that runs a little drop-in program, Darlene Mertel, said that people showed up and they were soaking wet. Of course, it wasn't cold enough that anybody was going to die, but I just feel like this is lacking in common sense and a sense of compassion, because some of the people, they don't have any money to go to a coffee shop. And, you know, the business owners downtown say they don't want people hanging around, and there's not really much of any place for people to go on Sundays. I will also say that I was very bothered by the death of Sam Boyles. And I know other people were really concerned about that. And I just hope that the unhoused people here feel that they can use, I guess she had fallen, it's not why she died, but she had fallen into a really bad depression. And I hope that it's made clear to the unhoused people that they're welcome to use the Treatment and Recovery Center, Burt Nash's peer support, and other services that they have, because I guess before she died, she was in a state of despair. And I hope that it's made clear that people that are homeless can also call the mobile outreach. I'm not sure that the homeless realize this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Sarah, do we have anyone else online? All right, we'll close general public comment and bring it back for our regular agenda. And our first item is on the Consolidated Fire District 1 year-end transfers. And I think we'll have Cammie for that.
Good evening, Commissioners. What you have before you is a resolution to create a separate fund for equipment reserve for Consolidated Fire District Number 1. It is to transfer the budgeted amount for 2023's budget, and any funds transferred just need a resolution. So that's what we're here for.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Cammie? This is part of our regular budget that was agreed upon, so this is just the process that happens. It's probably a general, or this is a public comment item, so I think we don't have any questions at the moment, but I will open it up. Is there anyone from the audience who would like to make public comment on this item? Anyone online? No? All right, with that, we'll close in public comment and bring it back to commissioners.
Motion to adopt Resolution 2403 to establish the Consolidated Fire District Number 1 Equipment Reserve Fund and transfer 2023 budgeted transfer to the Equipment Reserve Fund.
Second?
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Cammie, and I think you might have our next item also for year-end transfers.
Commissioners, I'm going to kick us off, and Cammie is available if we have questions as well. It's part of our year-end financial process is to do any last-minute year-end transfers, and once we are aware of balances. Douglas County ended 2023 in sound financial position with increased revenues and unspent budgeted funds. So before you is a resolution to transfer make some transfers to equipment reserve for a few departments, specifically IT and the sheriff's office, and then also transfer a larger sum to CIP. This is part of what we do each year when we have the funds available to make it happen. So we stand for any questions commissioners have related to the year-end transfers.
Commissioners, any questions? So did you want to quickly just address the special liability, special building ambulance fund, why those are no longer being used and what's happening with those?
We discussed it during the budget process, but we eliminated those funds as a part of the 2024 process and the 2025 budget process. So any ending fund balance that they had was moved to the other funds.
Thank you. I'll open this up for public comment. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on this item? Or anyone online?
Oh.
Okay, close public comment. Commissioners?
Sorry, I was thinking no questions, and that's why I was shaking my head no. Commissioner Reed here, happy to make a motion to approve the 2023 year-end transfers.
Before I second, I just want to commend Sarah and the budget staff on making projections each year and being accurate in those projections. I know that's hard work to do. So with that, I'll go ahead and second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. That puts us to the, for administration, the update to the Douglas County Animal Code. I know I had sent some comments forward to staff, and I believe that there might be an interest in tabling that for further work. Jill, can I pass that to you?
Yeah, or maybe I can start it. I would just say, Commissioners, it's my request that we table this item. We've had I'm still consulting with legal counsel on what the nature of the resolution is. So there's really no issues with the content or the approach. We just are checking to see if we need to have a home rule charter resolution or we can use a regular resolution. And I didn't get that done by today. So that will allow us to figure that out and then make any, and bring it back to the commission at a later date with some additional input from Commissioner Willie. So that's why we don't have staff from the Humane Society here either. So
And just for clarification, some of the comments that I had sent back to staff, can those be part of the conversation before it comes back, or will we just manage that next time we have our public hearing for it?
I think if it's smaller, the kind of typographical items that you were talking about, I think we can certainly make those. If there's larger changes related to certain items, we can discuss if we can incorporate it at that point.
Okay.
Because this becomes part of the county code and we have to republish it, I really like to make these changes as all together as we can so that we do not have to republish them.
Right. Any objections to tabling this, fellow commissioners? I would like to ask if there's anyone who came to make public comment on this item, even if we're tabling it, we'd be glad to hear from you if you came for that purpose. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on the animal code? Okay. With that, I would have a motion to table.
I don't think you need a motion, you can move on to the next item.
All right, we will table that. Thank you. And that puts us to our fourth item. It is a comprehensive plan amendment. And I believe Sandy Day is going to run us through that conversation.
And while Sandy's getting that up, I'll just mention, I know we also have staff from the City of Lawrence Municipal Services available via Zoom too as well, if commissioners have questions.
Sandy Day, Planning. The item that you're being asked to consider tonight is a comprehensive plan amendment. This item comes to you from the Planning Commission. They considered it in November, and also the City Commission considered this item at their meeting last night. This application is part of a larger development request that included annexation of property. A portion of it was already annexed into the city in '79, and then the balance of the property was annexed in '23, just last year, the early portion of the year. The comprehensive plan amendment is a separate application. There are also several rezonings that go with this property and a preliminary plat that goes with this property. The only item that was coming before you this evening is the comprehensive plan component of this development request. Also, the applicant is subject to a local floodplain development permit and changes to the floodplain through FEMA. So the first step of that is the CLOMAR, the conditional letter of map revision, and ultimately to a letter of map revision. I am not the floodplain manager, so my responses on that will be very limited, but we can certainly talk about it as you need. Where we're at in the process is that the property has been annexed, so that gets a green check mark. The comprehensive plan, the zoning, and the plat processes are in some state of process, so they do not have a green check box. There will also be future infrastructure plans if the project is approved, and then potentially site plan applications that would be coming forward for this property. So really, there is a lot of review still yet to come forward on this property. One of the questions that has been asked is the comprehensive plan and how this request falls in line with the development practices. So we have the comprehensive plan, Plan 2040, is the umbrella document for both the City of Lawrence and the unincorporated portions of Douglas County. Within the comprehensive plan, we have a number of area plans, nodal plans, and those are incorporated by reference under Chapter 8 of Plan 2040 under the specific land use plans. And then each plan has its own little link. So we are talking about the revised Southern Development Plan specifically is what is being requested to be amended. And then the amendment process is really set out in state statute as well as Plan 2040, which has a set of 7 criteria. This is just a little clip out of the page. I'm not asking you to be able to read that text, and we'll cover those in just a moment. So that is how we look at this. So from very high level, down a little more, down a little more, down a little more, until we get to the zoning and the plating. And that is where we are really looking at the finite details of a development application. So this is from Plan 2040, the comprehensive plan amendment review criteria or the findings of fact, if you want to think of them that way. These are each headings in the staff report, how the plan results from changed circumstances, how the proposed amendment advances a clear public purpose, how the amendment is consistent with long-range goals and policies, and that's actually a reference back to the guiding document, Plan 2040. How the proposed amendment it may affect the adequacy of planned facilities and services, that the proposed amendment is reasonably compatible with land use relationships, how it reflects adjacent neighborhood desired outcomes and advances the interests of not only the city, the citizens of Lawrence, but also Douglas County. So each of those are discussed in the staff report. What this slide highlights is the dark boundary represents the boundary of the revised Southern Development Plan. That's the plan area that we're looking at. All of this salmon-colored property has been annexed, and so this is an annexation layer that is governed within that. And what I would like to highlight is that we're really talking about this specific area of the plan boundary, everything to the east of what is Michigan Street Extended is part of the Baker Wetlands. I think this piece is owned by KDOT. And then there are a few parcels within the plan that have not yet been annexed, but that's the extent of the area that we're talking about. And then state statute, which lets us look at and develop comprehensive plans, does allow for communities to look at not only whole plans, but portions of plans, which is what this application is this evening. The applicant provided a concept plan, and so that was a base document we used to understand what the applicant's request is in terms of what they're looking at. They have a number of uses that are proposed, both residential and non-residential uses, as well as portions of that existing open space designation would remain within this project. Not all of it, but portions of it. And then there is also the intent to incorporate some drainage and open space components into the project, and then also create recreational opportunities within that green space. And I'll let the applicant talk to you more about their specific development concept. One of the things that we looked at was kind of some of the surrounding land uses. We know that the area to the east is pretty well defined in terms of what future land use development is. We know more about Kansas Highway 10 and the intersection of the two highways of K10 and Highway 59. There are a few remaining agricultural pieces that have not been annexed within the plan boundary that would be future development applications, presumably, unless a property owner wanted to do something different and and continue to hold or retain that land. One of the other existing conditions we looked at is the boundary of the regulatory floodplain. Floodplain is made up of the floodway, which is the patterned area, and then the floodway fringe area, which is this lighter salmon color. And just to be clear, development is permitted in the floodplain today. It is allowed under city regulations to a very specific standard. It's not easy to do, but it is developable property within the regulations. There is no development allowed in the floodway. That is sacrosanct. And then this was a slide that we presented both to the Planning Commission and to the City Commission. We were able to overlay the highway design, intersection design into the project and into some of our GIS layers, so we could be able to see how all of that land use is interacting. One of the development components is kind of a land swap, if you will, where the applicant would be working with KDOT. You can see on the upper slide where 35th Street is in its existing alignment. Why GIS shows that as North Queens Road, I have no idea. Please disregard that. It is 35th Street. The expectation from the developer is to work with KDOT to release some of that right-of-way, shift 35th Street to the south so that you create buildable pad areas on both sides of the street rather than just one side of the street. So that was also something new in a changed condition that we took into account with the assessment of the project and this plan. To show where this project is located in relationship to the existing commercial corridor, the applicant is requesting some specific commercial zoning. That is not an item that would be coming to this body, but just for context, what the applicant's intent with this project is to do something that was considered to be mixed use development. So the only way to go through and have a mixed use development in the land development code is to have discrete zoning districts. We have a mixed use district within the code. It can be a little bit challenging to work with. The other opportunity is to look at traditional neighborhood development or the SMART code. So this project is really trying to get at some of those concepts without invoking the SMART code, which is an arduous process, to say the very least. And with the work that we're doing on updating the land development code, I don't think it was anybody's preference to crack open that particular document and try to do this kind of development. But it does have similar components in terms of being walkable, of integrating natural resources into our development projects. Historically, this property was actually part of the Southern Development Plan, which was adopted in 1994. You can see kind of the boundary of the plan here. You can see where that property was annexed in 79, and then you can see the area that surrounds it that was part of that boundary. So that plan lived as a document from 94 until 2007, when it became the revised Southern Development Plan. And that was a direct correlation to the K-10 corridor highway and having a better understanding of what some of those land uses are. You can see the Baker wetlands reflected, as well as an expectation for open space. The plan was amended again in 2013, and that was specific to the Menards project that we saw. So that's an example of where we're looking at a plan amendment at the parcel level or project level. This was an exhibit that we provided both throughout this development process as well as in the zoning applications. This is intended to show where that open space will be retained within the project. It's not all of the open space. You see more of that in the applicant's rendering, but this would be the area that would be dedicated and retained as open space through a zoning overlay. So you have not only the comprehensive plan, this is where you're starting to see that implementation of the plan through the zoning, if that is approved. And that is a pending item in front of the City Commission in March. So this is a graphic that represents what the land use map would look like if approved, where what we are showing, rather than those individual discrete zoning districts, we're showing that we are moving toward more of this mixed use district. So that can be commercial, residential, it could be a work-live unit, it can be a lot of different things. We would expect to have a little bit more conventional commercial zoning along the highway frontage. The other thing that is being introduced into the plan is low-density residential development. So that's kind of a new component. One of the things that we have talked about is in this plan, it had this land use of auto-related commercial. This auto-related commercial is really a holdover from Horizon 2020 as well as from the 1966 zoning code. We do not have a land use, or I'm sorry, we do not have a zoning district that is auto-related commercial. But it is a land use. It is still retained because there's still properties that do have that designation that are not part of this specific comprehensive plan amendment that would be updated with a future amendment when the entire plan is scheduled for an update rather than just this project-specific update. One of the unique things about this project is we are really looking at neighborhood creation. We're looking at an entire unit of development rather than just piecemeal development, which is more typical of what we see for development applications, zoning, subdivision plats, and those types of development applications. So this particular neighborhood would be a new neighborhood. We do not have delineated or designated neighborhoods, and that is not to say that there are not neighborhoods in the rural area. There absolutely are. It's just that they're not organized like, say, the Scenic River neighborhood up here in the Northwest. But it is kind of a comparable in size to some other inner neighborhood units that we see within the community, and then it is also proposing this idea or concept of having a mix of uses, so residential places to work and play and live together as a community. But then it would also feed into some of our other area schools in this part of the community. This is, again, just a recap of those comprehensive plan amendment findings that are in here. I've kind of tried to shorten them so it gets on one page and you can read it a little better. The changed circumstances and unforeseen conditions since that adoption. So specifically, we have much more knowledge about the intersection of the highway, what that design and access is going to be. We also have adopted Plan 2040, which was not a thing previously. Advancing a clear and public purpose, and certainly this is where the public has had some debate, but staff summary is that this is advancing that clear public purpose in terms of advancing area for development that has been identified in planning documents for development. It is adding to the housing inventory and housing choice opportunities for the community. Consistent with long-range plan goals and policies, and this is again more of a reference to Plan 2040, talking about infill development. The property's been annexed, so there's that expectation of some level of development for that property. The adequacy of existing or planned facilities and services. Again, this is a known area. KDOT has been planning for access to this property with an expectation for development and services. There is intended to be coordination of utility extension, both through the KDOT project and for city municipal services. Having reasonably compatible land use relationships. In this particular project, it's pretty confined and contained. We have known land use to the east of Michigan Street, so we know what that is going to be. We have the Wakarusa River to the south, so we know that that is a contained and confined area in terms of the relationship. And we look at these things, comprehensive plan, high level, zoning kind of mid-level, subdivision plat, and site plan design at the most narrow level of how those things intersect. And then advancing the interests of the citizens of Lawrence and Douglas County. Again, this is where I've probably heard some comments from the public that I'll let you make up your mind on that one. Staff did recommend approval. Planning Commission forwarded, they approved the proposed amendment 5-4. The City Commission's action last night was, oops, I'm sorry, that was not 5-1, it was 4-1. And then it's in front of you this evening. So I am happy to answer any questions. I know the developer is here. They can talk to you about their specific development interest. Thank you.
I will have quite a few questions, but I'll turn to commissioners first. Is there anything you'd like to ask Sandy before we hear from the developer, from the applicant? Not yet. Okay. We'd like to hear from the applicant, if you'd like a chance to come forward.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Patrick Watkins. I'm an attorney. I am here on behalf of B3 Development. With me up here today is Phil Struble from Land Plan Engineering. They are the team responsible for the design in front of you. We appreciate Sandy's presentation. A sincerely serious amount of work has gone into not only a presentation tonight, but this process along the way. We've been at this for over 8 months, trying to refine and design a site that meets the wide range of goals for the community. And the staff's done a tremendous job. So I want to recognize them first. I also want to appreciate and recognize the staff report. It's thorough. It goes through the elements for amendment to comp plan. And we appreciate their recommendation for approval, and we adopt their position in many ways and we appreciate their support. I have a few things to add. I'm going to pass it off to Phil at the end. He'll talk more specifically about the floodplain. But this is a unique property. Sandy mentioned it. It's a property that's entirely annexed into the city of Lawrence. It's a property that will certainly be developed. And as Sandy mentioned, it's long been identified as an auto-related use in the comprehensive plan. It's obviously got its unique topography and site conditions, and it's an important property. It sits at the junction of a federal highway and a major state highway. It's situated next to the Baker Wetlands. It's one of the key entrances into the city of Lawrence. And obviously this proposal comes at a unique time. It's a time when the K-10 corridor is being redesigned to add more lanes. It comes at a time when there's deep need for housing of all types. And we think the developer has done a nice job of putting together a proposal that serves a wide range of needs of the community. There's a significant amount of residential density to be added with this development. Multifamily homes, townhomes, single-family lots, over 800 units. Mayor Littlejohn said it well last night in his first comments about this comp plan amendment. And I'm quoting him when he said, "We direly need housing, just available housing badly." They voted on it last night and they approved it 4-1, but this can't be overstated. Among our development team, we take part in a lot of local developments, and we stay apprised and attuned to what the building permit counts are in Lawrence. We don't know of any significant projects that are going to pull building permits in 2024. This project could. And as Sandy noted, this proposed development features a unique mixture of uses. It fulfills high expectations that the city has in our master planning documents. We've collaborated with KDOT. We have an agreement in principle for the use of their right-of-way that they'll relinquish, and access for the site. This proposal has a number of unique ecological benefits when compared, especially when compared with those contemplated for auto-related uses. There's an agreement with Baker Wetlands for a number of protections there. There's been a tremendous amount of resources put into analyzing and reviewing not only FEMA standards, but the high standards that the city places on its floodplain management. This project's been through a series of long meetings, and it's been interesting. And the discussions have mostly been positive. There's obviously some criticisms, but we think there's a reasonable response to all of the criticisms that we've received along the way. One concern that has come up more than once is that this will open up the Wakarusa floodplain to more development. And it's hard to hear from a developer's perspective that particular argument for a number of reasons. This site has a number of attributes that distinguish it from everything along the Wakarusa River corridor. It's not a particularly difficult analysis. You can work on the interactive map to start at Clinton Lake and work your way down to the Kaw River. But to name a few of the site attributes that we think are distinguishable: one, this site has been annexed. Significant portion of the site is above the floodplain. The site requires no outside fill to develop, which is a critical condition for any development. Site is at the interchange of a federal highway and a state highway. We can't identify any other places along the corridor, and there's very limited access to State Highway K10, not to mention the commercial roadways that would be needed to drive any sort of transport to these, or access to these sites. Every project that comes to you all and comes to the city is required to meet the standards for development. Approving this project does not limit the city or the county's ability to deny or approve future projects. And for those reasons, we think this project is distinguishable. We have a hard time hearing that this is going to open it up to a range of new development along the Wakarusa floodplain. We're proud of the work that's been done up to this point. We're pleased with the support that we've received. The staff has been working on this project for some time. We're pleased to have their support tonight on their recommendation. The Planning Commission has had several hours of discussion. We're pleased to have their recommendation for approval. City Commission approved it 4-1 last night. We're pleased to have their review. A lot of discussions, a lot of analysis. We're here to ask for your support tonight. I'll let Phil talk a little bit about the floodplain analysis.
Good evening, Phil Struble, Land Plan Engineering. So in addition to the floodplain, I've got several other small items, 3 or 4 of them that I also want to bring up. But so as Sandy mentioned, development in the floodplain is not prohibited. And in fact, development of the floodplain from FEMA's perspective and how they determine the floodplain also anticipates some level of development in that the floodplain is determined, it's 2 pieces. It's the floodway fringe and it's the floodway. And the total floodplain is determined with the initial hydraulic study. And then they fill in the edges to the point to where the floodway increases something less than 1 foot. And that's how you get the floodway fringe. And so just by virtue of that model, it anticipates something happening in the floodplain. The floodplain maps we're using are 2019 and 2020, and while they're not brand new, they're not necessarily antiquated at this point in time. In our experience in working with FEMA in filling in the floodplain, the general rule we hear from them is that they prefer to see increases in the floodway elevation when we fill in the floodplain of being something less than 1/2 foot. And so we run models typically in other communities where that's what we look at in the floodway elevation being something less than a half a foot. Lawrence has elected to be significantly more protective of the floodway than what FEMA is. And in fact, their requirements of us developing in the floodway requires us to show that increases of the floodway be less than 0.00 feet. No increase in the floodway if we're going to fill in the floodway fringe. And we've accomplished that. It wasn't easy. It took us about 5 months of iterative computer models, meeting with the city staff, meeting with planning staff, looking at other mechanisms, other places we can move our development around. That's kind of why one of the reasons we have a rather unique look to our development is we wanted to accomplish this 0.00 rise in the floodway. And we were able to accomplish that. And in fact, we got an email, I believe it was Monday of this week, from the MSO with the City of Lawrence finally approving our final computer model for us to submit to the planning office so we can then fill out the documentation and submit it on to FEMA for application for our CLOMR. And it will show to FEMA that we have 0.00 rise impact upstream and downstream of our development because of our development. And so our system, keep in mind, FEMA requires less than a half a foot. That's not a hard rule, but it's what they like to see. The city requires 0.00. So we have this factor of 100 level increase of protective measures imposed by the City of Lawrence on our development in the floodplain, which is why we have confidence in the fact that what we're doing in the floodplain development is going to have a very limited impact. It'll have no impact upstream and downstream of our development, and we'll have protective measures for the development within our development. So, the protection, and then on top of that, the minimum building opening elevation of all properties adjacent to the floodplain have to be 2 more feet higher than that. So, we've got multiple, it's a belt, suspenders, on top of belt and suspenders, protective measures for our development in the floodplain. So, which is why we're confident in our development plans for the floodplain. It took us a long time to get through the city. It will now go, hopefully within the next week or so, to FEMA for their review of everything else once again of what we've done. So we're confident on our design of protective measures for the floodplain. Moving on to uses. And one of the things, what we're asking for is adoption of a change from the comprehensive plan previously to the comprehensive plan that has been developed by us in the planning office, which is before you. The old plan had this auto-related development, half of which it also required fill in the floodplain, just like we're doing. But the difference is a plan like that to submit to the City of Lawrence, auto-related, it's going to be a parking lot full of cars. That's what the previous plan had required. Since we're adjacent to the floodplain, we have no requirements through the City of Lawrence for any detention, any runoff measures other than just best management practices, a significant less set of restrictive requirements comes from that single-use development. Our plan, which is a multi-use, multi-zoned, multi-access development, we're putting in bioswales. We are putting in measures for the creek that runs through our development from the west to the east. for protective measures for runoff, for collection of sediment, for collection of trash that may go through there. So because of this change in use, change in design from the old comp plan to the current one, we're able to work with the city and incorporate a lot more protective measures that in the old plan we weren't required to do. I also want to comment that on the east side of this project is what we're calling Michigan Street. And it's a township-maintained road built by KDOT. And I believe we're in negotiations with the county and city staff. We're going to put on our side of that street curb and gutter, underground stormwater piping, turn lanes. So we'll be able to improve that county road and hopefully it'll be taken over. I believe it's going to be taken over by the city. I don't know where those negotiations are. Fourth, I want to talk about Baker Wetlands. We've worked with Baker throughout this whole process. And we've come up with 4 things that they have expressed concern over and we've agreed with. Number 1, the trash collection. Number 2, collection of sediment that will carry all the nitrogens and phosphates that they want to keep out of their wetlands. Number 3, that we wouldn't increase their flood surface water elevation, and we can demonstrate that. And number 4, one of their main concerns, and when you think about it, it's perfectly logical, is they're concerned, they have problems with the amount of light spillage from the city of Lawrence that goes into their property. And we're working with them to put in shorter light poles, fewer light poles, and work as many ways as we can to prevent the light from spilling from our development into the Baker Wetlands. One of the fun ones that I like to bring up, because I travel this from my residence in the county, is my ability to buy gas. And finally, I will get to have a place where I can pull in and gas up my car and buy a couple of donuts. So, so in closing, we've been working on this for a considerable amount of time. We've covered a lot of ground. We've looked at numerous options. What we have done, what we've presented, this is a project that's in the city of Lawrence. It's a city of Lawrence project. We meet all the requirements established and exceed the requirements established by the city of Lawrence for this project. It has been thoroughly vetted by staff. We finally achieved probably the last approval that we needed to get through them just this week. And we're ready to move on to FEMA with that. It has the staff's recommendation for approval, and I encourage you to approve this change to the comprehensive plan amendment. And with that, Patrick and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I'm sure we will have many. Commissioners, does anyone want to kick off some initial questions to either Sandy or the applicant? If not, I'll start with a series of questions. Okay. I'm not sure who wants to answer this. Maybe this is Sandy. So we have a variety of plans that you've put before us, starting in 94, 2007, 2013. I know there was an application that came through in 2020. Each of those has a different footprint of what is anticipated or requested for development. And this one is, of course, much, much larger than any of those. So just looking at between the 2007 revised Southern Development Plan and the 2013, which 2007, starting in 94. So 94, the outline of what was anticipated to be built rather than open space followed the contours of what we see as being outside of the floodplain currently. In 2007, that was expanded slightly. In 2013, it was reduced again back to the original size. Can you talk about how big the difference is between what is currently outside of the floodplain, what was anticipated, which would match some of these Southern Development Plans, and what is asked for in this? I believe it's like 17 acres is what is in our current plan, and this is much, much larger.
I apologize. I don't have those numbers kind of committed to memory, and there's probably in a spreadsheet somewhere on my desk. The project has ebbed and flowed in terms of how much area is being included back and forth, depending on which development applicant was in front of us. If I recall, it seemed like there was one project that actually went even further south than this. That was a while back, and I don't remember how far it got, but you know, yes, there have been many iterations that we've seen. I would say that that open space area has been anywhere from 20 to 80 total acres, if that's what you're asking me. And I want to say it's around 25 or 30. Sorry, I just don't have that number off the top of my head.
I probably could have asked that before you got here, so you have that prepared. I think my point is that nothing that we've seen in the Southern Development Plan has included this much encroachment into the open space, into the floodplain.
That is correct.
The 2020 application did, but it was denied.
I believe that's correct.
Can we talk about KDOT? I know, so in the 2020 application, which was denied, and one of the reasons it was denied was because KDOT was not allowing access that had been requested to that property. And then there were others that felt that that shouldn't be tackled, that comprehensive plan amendment shouldn't be tackled until the whole revised Southern Development Plan was redone, which is scheduled for this year. So we still have kind of both of those conditions, or we have the second of that condition. So how has the conversation gone with KDOT about access here? Are they completely on board? Were they happy with the conversation? Are they getting what they need out of it?
My conversations with KDOT have been that, one, that they are part of the review team, so they received the applications. They were generally supportive of the project. There's certainly steps that still have to be taken. This is not a done deal. They still have to go through that land transfer piece in terms of the relocation of 31st Street. They are generally supportive of that. That will actually allow them to do some of the staging work for the highway project. So they have been very interested in where this project moves forward. And I think one of the other things is now that that intersection design has been figured out, that has also been kind of a game changer in those discussions. So they have indicated that they are comfortable with the access that's being proposed. We know that there are additional discussions going on about the peripheral street components. That is a subdivision component, and so the preliminary plat was approved with a laundry list of conditions. Those street improvements are one of those things. So that's still, while we have an idea, as Mr. Struble described, for Michigan Street, there may be more. We tend to try to encourage the annexation of full streets, not half streets. So, there's that kind of conversation that's going on as well. But to your point about KDOT, I believe they're comfortable with the project and the access as designed.
I'm going to ask about Michigan Street, which isn't actually Michigan Street, it's East 1300 Road, so it's a township-maintained road, and yet it needs to develop to city standards. What's the conversation about annexing that road, because it currently isn't?
Correct. And that is a conversation that the condition on the preliminary plat, I believe, has language that says that the street needs to be annexed. And I have not been in those direct conversations. Dave Corliss, and I believe, is working with Chad Voigt about some of those. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, did I? Oh, goodness. I apologize. Dave Cronin with Chad is working on what that's going to look like. So those conversations are ongoing. I haven't checked in with MSO team on that particular thing. We've been a little tied up with a couple of other projects and trying to get through this, that I've kind of set the subdivision plat aside for the moment. but that is coming. And so when it comes to the township roads, I do struggle with keeping those in my brain, so that's why I do tend to refer to it as Michigan Street Extended, with the expectation that, yes, it would be annexed, and it would either be designed to meet city street standards or be approved for some kind of modified street design. But that would be through municipal services and operations and the city commission.
What conversations have happened with the Corps of Engineers?
I cannot answer that. That is not a conversation that I have been part of.
Can I turn to either Patrick or Phil? What conversations have been had with the Corps of Engineers who control Clinton Lake Dam?
We've had no conversations directly with the Corps of Engineers. We've talked with FEMA, but that's it.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sandy, I have a question for you. And I'm really going to focus on the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
So would you agree that the comprehensive plan expects, I mean, it has things in there for policies on an open space plan, for increasing open space, for acquiring open space? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And then question 3 says, how is the proposed amendment consistent with the long-range goals and policies of the plan? This plan actually reduces the amount of open space that's available currently in the Southern Development Plan. Is that correct?
It does.
So if I understand what you just told me, the comprehensive plan says we need more open space and we need to protect open space. The question we have before us is it consistent with the long-range plan? And what you're telling me is this reduces the amount of open space.
Sure. And I can explain that by saying this. The comprehensive plan addresses many components of land use, not just open space. It talks about infill development, about densification, about coordinated development and design. So staff's finding is that it was broadly consistent with the comprehensive plan. Is it consistent with absolutely every policy? No. And I don't think that we would ever find a project that is 100% compliant with every policy of Plan 2040. It does sometimes become a bit of a test of value. Which value are you trying to meet, or which value are you addressing, and instead of harming, are you mitigating? And so that is part of this project.
Okay. Do you want to address really quickly that same question, because there's specific language in the comprehensive plan about converting, floodplain, preserving floodplain and not developing in floodplain? Is that another case where staff's recommendation is sort of weighing those two priorities and leaning heavier towards one than the other?
There's a couple of pieces. So that is, Jeff may correct me when I'm back in the office tomorrow, that is definitely an aspirational value of the plan. We do allow today, our code allows development in portions of the floodplain, so the fringe area. The implementation of that particular goal needs to happen in other places, not just in comprehensive plans. But we do need to be cautious in how we approach that kind of a land use recommendation. If we're saying, don't ever build, how far are you taking that? Because that can have other implications. If we outright prohibit somebody's use of land, you have a very different question that you have to do. So do we protect all of it? Do we protect most of it? Do we protect some of it? And how is the best possible way to do that? So that's part of the dynamic of what we're trying to evaluate. We believe, and that was the positive recommendation staff gave to you in the staff report, that is the narrow approval the Planning Commission acted on. So that's where you're seeing that balance of the infill development is good, the mix of uses is good, the design is good, but it's in this location and there's this floodplain. So where's that balance? And it is the commission's job to make that determination. We believe that the balance is in favor of the project.
Question for the applicant. Thanks, Sandy. So one of the considerations that we have to consider is how is the proposed amendment consistent with the long-range goals and policies of the plan? And I have a section of the plan here that says utilize floodplains for low-impact park recreation and open space uses such as playfields, trails, and passive recreation. So my question for the developer and for the applicant is, walk me through the thought process that you had about, you know what, that part of the plan isn't important, something else is more important, and that we're not going to honor that part of the plan because we value a different part, to sort of what Sandy just said. There's two values at play here. One is this idea of housing, and that we really need housing, and that this is a unique intersection. You listed, I think, 4 different areas. Can you just walk me through where that balance is and how you got to your response in the application, which is, yes, we meet that for all Plan 2040?
But I think you're talking about competing interests, and there are a number of them. The comprehensive plan is one big book of competing interests. And I do want to let Phil and Corby talk about this because they have integrated into the design. But what we're talking about in a lot of ways is trying to do something for every piece of the pie. And this development, from what I see, and when we wrap our arms around this, we hit everything. We try to hit everything, and there's a story behind what you see. And there is an analysis that they go through on every one of these levels. I'll let them describe the project, but what you're asking us is exactly what we've tried to do, is hit everything.
Actually, before we go to that, can I kind of follow up on the conversation that Commissioner Kelly was having? Also in Plan 2040, it specifically says to strengthen floodplain protections. I'm curious for Sandy if that's what has been in the works for that, because I can tell you that the Wakarusa Valley was very much on our minds as we created that document when we said, I think it's Chapter 2, Goal 1, Action Item 1.8 to increase floodplain protections for the city and county.
Sure. And this is where I very much wish Amy were online because she could answer that off the top of her head. I'm not sure exactly when all of the order of things have happened. I think we did do a relatively recent update to the city's floodplain regulations. I don't know how much farther or more regulatory information would be added to the city's zoning code for floodplain protection. That's certainly something we can explore with the update to the land development code. I have not heard specifically about that particular thing. I can ask Becky, she's online, to check and see if she knows something in the land development code that is being discussed on that particular component, and give her a minute to think about that. She was not expecting to have to answer any questions, so I apologize for dodging, but that's the best I can tell you.
And we also have county staff here, so we can ask about the county side of things.
Don't know about the county.
In a minute. Just kind of a response, Sandy, you were talking about, if we had a blank slate, how much of the floodplain that is allowed to be developed would be allowed to, that is available for development would be allowed to be developed. But we're not starting with a blank slate. We're starting with a comprehensive plan that has a map that says this much open space, this much is developable. So I think that's where we're coming from, is we're being asked to amend that particular map for this piece of property. So it's not a question of how much anywhere. It's a question of this is what's been expected for this location. And then we need, what's the justification for decreasing that open space and increasing the developable part? And then that probably leads back to the applicant who was wanting to speak. If you.
So I'm going to take a stab at it, and then I'm going to let Phil jump into this. The comprehensive plan map kind of follows the existing floodplain boundaries today. The applicant's intent in going through the process with FEMA would change where those floodplain boundaries are. And that changed boundary follows what we see in the kind of the concept plan and the preliminary plat, so that remaining open space would remain floodplain if the applicant is successful through the FEMA process of having removed portions of that property out of the designated floodplain. So that's the simple answer. Anything else? Okay.
Hi, Corby Rust, Land Plan Engineering. Getting back to Commissioner Kelly's question about the open space and its uses. Of the 177 acres, over 60, which includes most of the floodway, are open space, trails, the big pond, lake that's about 15 acres, which is all usable for the development and basically becomes an extension of the Baker Wetlands, which is several hundred acres right next door of wonderful recreational facilities. And you don't have to go too far for the recreational fields. And this all is, I'd like to add, it's not dead agricultural land. This is vibrant native prairie is our plan. Additional wetlands, all very nice and again, going to look a lot like what you see across the street. Thanks.
Okay, that didn't answer my question.
Oh,
I
I'm
appreciate that. So you said there's 177 acres. In the current southern plan, how many acres are for open space?
I can only speak to this development, which is 177 acres, and then the 60.
So maybe I wasn't clear.
Sorry.
Of the area that you're looking at, the annexed area of this property in the current plan, how much is open space?
68.71 acres is the area that would be open space. I should know better, I apologize. The zoning application for the open space is around 68 acres of this total development.
And Sandy, how much was, so if I look at the area plan map, how much acreage is for open space in the area plan map? Because it's everything that's in the floodplain, right?
It is.
Let's say we don't know the number. It's significantly more than this plan asked for.
It is.
Would that be
yes.
accurate?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's over 100 acres.
Okay, I'm just trying to underline that we're reducing the amount
You
of
are
open space.
reducing it. Yeah.
So back to the applicant, talk to me about the thought process that went through looking at the comprehensive plan saying, I need to reduce the amount of open space in there because as Mr. Watkins, and here's my thinking, as Mr. Watkins said, we don't expect this ever to happen. You know, we can't talk about what development plans are there in the future, but I will say I'm concerned about if we start a pattern here where the pressure for housing is so high that we're going to eliminate open space. So I just want to hear that thought process.
Right.
Yeah.
So we don't look at it as if we're reducing open space. We're increasing the quality of the open space that you end with. Okay, so right now the open space, and not to be derogatory about agricultural ground, but it is farmed ground, no outside activity, no pedestrian ability, no recreational value other than what the farmer achieves from his piece of ground. Our open space, although it's significantly less, is going to have a pond that's going to have public access, and we're going to have a boardwalk out onto it that connects to the public multi-use trail that connects to the trailway paralleling the K10 on both sides, so the public will have access to go use the boardwalks that are in Baker Wetlands. They can come around and access ours. In addition, all the ground around that open space will be, and we're working with some specialists to come back in and vegetate that with native grasses that we're going to set up an ability to where it can be maintained all the time, where we're not just planting it and walking away. Thirdly, we have that creek, the existing creek that cuts through our property, and we've met with the farmers of Walkaway Farms, which is the property on the other side of Highway 59. They constantly have a problem of their sediment filling up in that creek and backing water up on their property, but they don't have access to the KDOT part and our part to clean out that sediment. So we're going to be able to go in there and clean up that creek, revegetate it where we can, reestablish it. And then we have 2 north-south bioswales that will drain the K-10 right-of-way and our property that will go through that before it reaches that creek. And so all those combined, although we have reduced an acreage for the open space, the quality that we're providing both our development and the surrounding properties and the public as a whole is significantly better than just blank open space as you look at it.
So, thank you. I appreciate that. I want to say back to you what I think I understood, and then just maybe one little clarification. So I think we have to broaden our definition of open space. There are some who would like to see open space not improved at all. Let's just keep it the way it is today. But what I hear you saying is we should be okay with less open space because we're actually improving the public access. There's boardwalks, some of the water filtration that you're talking about. Like that should be the argument for why we're reducing it, is that we're making the current open space that we're keeping a higher quality, more publicly accessible open space. Is that what I heard you say?
And that's a correct answer, with the exception that, I mean, that's not a broad brush, Eudora to Clinton Dam answer.
Right.
Fair enough.
I got one. Can I keep going here? Okay, so let's do the same exercise with floodplain, right? So we clearly say in the comprehensive plan we want to protect floodplain. Talk to me about first how you decided that it was really important to develop in the floodplain here. Like that was something we had to do, that we had to do. You all sound like you're doing a ton of work to get there, right? At a ton of expense. Was it a financial part of the project? Because there are other places that are annexed in the city that are in the floodplain that we haven't developed on. There are places that we have developed on. So I'm interested from a developer's position, you know, an applicant's position, what's the thought process that says, we know this is dangerous, we know that life and property are at risk, but we think another value is higher for that? Okay, so multiple answers for that. One, in a very general sense, is with the what I would characterize as an overemphasis on infill in the Lawrence area. We're looking at every piece of floodplain within Lawrence that we can get some lots on to develop. And that is pushed because that's the only thing that's left in many of the infill areas. And, you know, we're going through some very rigorous exercises, trying to be prudent about where we do those, trying to do a good job, because many of the adjacent properties don't have the same level of protection that new properties do, right? So when we infill with floodplain fill, it's nearly impossible to not cause somebody else some problems. So that has driven this emphasis on infill to be just crazy. So we have to look at surrounding properties around Lawrence where we can develop. So we end up on this piece of property now. And yes, we saw immediately that it has a lot of floodplain on it. First one is going to be financial, right? I mean, what makes it economically viable? How many acres do we have to develop so the developer can economically afford to do this? Because at some point you can't even do, I mean, we couldn't do
The ground on this property that's outside of the floodplain, you couldn't do it. You can't get enough economic value out of that remaining piece of ground to even start. You're going to get into the floodplain one way or another just to develop the piece that's out of the floodplain. So we started there. We looked at the ability to dig the 15 to 17 acre pond on our property. It's not detention, it's nothing but the area that we're extracting our dirt to fill the floodplain. And it will be ultimately be a body of water for everybody's enjoyment. How much dirt can we get out of there? That's a second economic value. So that kind of tells us how much ground can we fill and get out of the floodplain. And then the third one is, what are some logical areas that third one, I didn't mention this, we have done a full wetlands analysis on this piece of property. So that identified the areas on this piece of property that we will stay away from. We're not going to mess with those. And in fact, we end up with more wetlands on this piece of property once we're done than when we start. I think we start with 21 acres of wetlands on this property and we end with 28 when we're all said and done. So there's a net benefit to the wildlife in this area and the environment because of that. So you combine those together. So fourth, we have an access off of Highway 59 at the south entrance that we meet with KDOT. It's a full-way intersection. There's a crossover right there. At a certain level of traffic, they would allow us to use that. So then that identifies the part of the southern piece of this that we can get into and we can develop. So how can we limit that, still keep the wetlands around that, develop it, and fill? So it's just this iteration of all these little conversations that end up with the plan we've got. Is that sufficient? I mean,
Yeah.
I can talk about this forever, so
Yeah,
you got to
and
stop me when I'm...
No, I think it's just fine. I mean, I think what I heard you say was that, we've seen a lot of applications come through for infill development, and very few of them have been approved at the city level. And so that's put a pressure on a different set of values, and in this case, it's floodplain, right? There's other sets of values that those other properties maybe weren't right for those neighborhoods. So, yeah, that's what I was just trying to get at. So
Okay,
thanks.
good.
Yeah.
Phil, before you go too far, I'll have a question for you. I wouldn't ask at this level of detail, except that it's, because I know that we're really just the comprehensive plan amendment, except that it's been part of the justification put forward for reducing open space is the public access. So it'll be a pond created and paths created. Is there an understanding of who retains that ownership?
Okay.
Is that owned by the developer ultimately, and who carries the liability? And will they or will they not allow full public access? Or I know in the past, when things like this have happened in terms of using fill to create some additional lots, then that pond has been donated back to city parks and rec, but they also have the long-term liability and cost associated with it. And I don't know if they're interested in that. So can you just address what the thoughts are about public access?
I'll start with by telling you nothing has been worked out. Secondly, we've offered it to the city immediately and they turned us down. So we're at the classic negotiating position about who's going to take ownership. This project will have a property owners association because there's a lot of other things that we have to take care of that we know we have to take care of. The bioswales are going to be ours to maintain. We're going to set some standards on how that, the creek on how we remove trash and keep it from getting onto Bakers, that's going to be ours to take care of. So there will be an entity available in perpetuity to take care of these things. So we're really not worried about that. We have a pretty high level of, a third one is going to be the city. We don't know of anybody that is set up to maintain native grasslands, how you have to, maintain them and keep the invasive species out and all that other stuff. So we're going to have to do that. So there will be an entity that is established to take care of this. If we end up having to add the pond and the trails and all that to that list, that's not a deal killer for us at all.
Thank you. Chance. Okay. I know we have some county staff here. I'd actually like to ask some questions if that's all right. And I wouldn't mind starting with Tanya Voigt, our Zoning and Codes Director. Thank you for being here. So I wanted to back up a couple of years and talk about, I believe it was 2019, when we had a high release event from Clinton Dam into the Wakarusa River, and also additional rains coming at that time. The dam had to in order to maintain their safe levels, but Washington Creek that flows into the Wakarusa River then was not able to discharge its water and backed up and flooded a great deal. And I believe we're asking FEMA to remap some of that area based on those conditions. Can you just fill in all the things I don't know about?
Yeah, so in 2017 and again in 2019, we were seeing flood events happening in the 500-year floodplain. So what that essentially means is we only regulate the 100-year floodplain. Along Washington Creek, we have rural landowners who had added homes, accessory dwelling units for elderly parents, and just new construction in general, accessory buildings and those types of things that were permitted to be built outside of the regulatory floodplain. But because we were seeing reoccurring events that were exceeding what we could actually regulate and where we could prevent homes or accessory structures from going in, we contacted the state and the federal government and asked them to do some new studies in our area. That is still ongoing. I think COVID maybe slowed that down quite a lot. And we have a set of draft maps that have showed triggered areas where we've seen flooding happen that are not currently mapped. Those areas, the State Division of Water Resources has all that information. I think they compare that to our bridges, culverts, any improvements we've made in infrastructure, and they will remap the entire area at the Wakarusa Creek level and south into any of the tributaries.
So currently, we've already identified difficulties with the FEMA flood maps as we use them for our policy and for development. And it's a slow process to get FEMA to kind of recognize what we see on the ground with that. So we have a project being proposed that uses the data available, uses the FEMA data, but we also have kind of some experiential knowledge that that has not been sufficient for protections to our rural area. So that kind of begs the question about, as numbers are being run on a development of this property, how does that figure into the activities of Clinton Dam, which I think maybe if they haven't been contacted, if we hadn't had any contact for this property with the Corps of Engineers, that certainly raises some concerns for me that, like what happened in 17 and 19 is not being considered with this project. Is that a fair assessment?
I'm not sure. We have been in contact with the Corps on the open space plan. We've met with the Corps on several occasions. They, I think for our first work session, had uploaded a letter of support for the open space plan for any protections along the Wakarusa, I think in hopes to prevent, additional structures or anything going in that could be inundated in the future.
Douglas County put in for a grant. This was about the time we had COVID money available. This was a separate grant. This was a couple years ago, and specifically to look at some protections in the Wakarusa River Valley. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so the Zoning and Codes Office, Sustainability and Heritage joined together and applied for BRIC funding at the federal level. It's, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but what it's for is floodplain resilience. So any communities that are having problems with flooding can apply for grant funding. Our request was in between $60 and $70 million to protect the entire Wakarusa corridor from Clinton Dam to the city of Eudora. And so that was what our grant application was for. Currently, that grant was not approved. It took so much, it would have taken so much of their money that they wouldn't have been able to allocate to other communities. One thing about that, though, is we did have a person from the federal government and the state Hazard Mitigation Office. They are trying to find ways to maybe be able to contribute to keeping acreage vacant or not developed in flood-prone areas. So if you can prove the floodplain protection aspect, which is a huge technical analysis that would be needed, but they are working on maybe trying to find a way for communities to be able to apply for those funds like what we had applied for but didn't get approved for.
We didn't get approved based on, of course, the totality, the size of the ask, but you feel like the conversations you've had with them, that the reasoning behind that request had merit, or they felt it had merit?
Yes, I think how they determine if a grant is funded or not is called a cost-benefit analysis. So what normally they do is they use buyouts. So they take structures, they can show the cost-benefit analysis of, the future floodplain protection of removing a structure from the floodplain. In our case, we don't have a lot of housing in the floodplain, so they weren't able to use that cost-benefit analysis that they do like along Tuttle Creek in Manhattan. I think they were able to get funding for that, and they were able to buy out 300 or 400 houses many years ago. But we don't have the houses there, and there's not really a way to apply for the grant without the structures being there and already being hazardous.
Much for planning ahead. Can you talk a little bit about our county open space plan that is in the works? It is not adopted. There's a draft getting ready to come back to us, I believe, next week. What is that? What are those conversations about the Wakarusa Valley or floodplains in general?
Yeah, so the open space plan's been going on a little bit over a year. There's been 6 or 7 public meetings. There's been, we have an advisory committee. It's been a pretty organized event where we've traveled all over the place trying to get, we also mailed surveys out to all the unincorporated landowners about what their goals are or what they'd like to see in an unincorporated open space plan. So they took all that data, all of the feedback from the public. We are consulted with a consultant company, Logan Simpson, out of Colorado. They do open space plans all over the country. So right now we have a draft. It's open to the public. It's open for review. Anyone can comment on that draft. We have a work session to go through that with the county commissioners next week, and we hope to bring a final draft to you at the beginning of April for approval. In the draft open space plan as it exists today, one of the goals of the open space plan is the preservation of the Wakarusa corridor. The plan does not identify what avenues that means, if that's conservation easements, if that's land acquisition. It does not identify any of that. Really, there would probably need to be another study of that specific area to identify that. But that is one of the major priorities in the open space plan. We have also been in partnership with the City of Lawrence, Eudora, Baldwin City, Lecompton. We've had meetings with them. The City of Lawrence and Douglas County seem to be in agreement for their open space goals and our open space goals to merge, and that be a joint goal for both jurisdictions.
Other commissioners?
Can I just put a slight caveat on shading on what Tanya said about the recommendations coming out of the open space plan? There is going to be a recommendation from staff to study the Wakarusa corridor. I think this needs to be multidisciplinary. The approach needs to be varied. We need to look at a lot of different factors, not just, I don't want to leave it with the notion that it's pure conservation. It could be making it more public, trails, accessibility, but also waterways, paths over the Wakarusa. How do we work into those factors? So it's I think we really need to spend more time and emphasis on the Wakarusa, and that's what we're hoping to bring to the commission.
Thank you.
And you've probably heard me say in conversations about open space that it's very helpful to us to find out what we need to prioritize preserving so that we know what is then available for developing. That seems like a very needed conversation as we're talking about the Southern Development Plan, because it's so that we can weigh these things as the applicant is bringing forward to say, how much of this do we really need to have open space? How much could we put towards housing? And that conversation coupled with the next step of a potential open space plan, I think seems really valuable.
I know we want to get to public comment, so I'm trying to keep my questions short, and I'm glad to see, thank you for being here, Tanya, and I'm glad to see Chad's here as well, because he may have had something to do with the floodplain regulations for the city. My question is on the sixth, number 6 of the things we have to look at, how does the proposed amendment reflect the adjacent neighbor's desired outcome? If they apply to FEMA and they meet the city's FEMA standards, what are the impacts upstream and downstream to their neighbors? Would they expect, I mean, we're not going to get less water, but now we have less places for water to go. What would be the impacts? And maybe to Sandy and the applicant, like how far upstream and downstream do we go on that?
I was a little bit actually confused about the no rise, the zero rise comment, because when I was looking in the documents, I thought there was some slight rise. So I think that might be worth clarifying.
An earlier version of our study showed that, I'm probably going to get this backwards, but upstream we had 1/10 of a foot rise and 3/100 of a foot rise downstream. And when the city came out with their determination that the number was 0.00, which was in October, we went back and spent the month of November revising our development plan once again, and the number is now 0.00, both upstream and downstream. So, yeah, I saw that on the screen as well, and those were old numbers.
I had a conversation with Chad earlier today, and then he put that into an email that went to all of us. I want to make sure that we also get that like part of the public record. Some of the things, so that, because it came in after public comment was closed. But Chad, do you mind coming up and kind of addressing some of the issues that you had in your email for us?
Well, what specifically would you like to know about?
Just be helpful for you to walk us through that so it can become part of the record.
Okay.
Pull it up too.
Yeah, so we were just trying to recap our conversation so that it wasn't just one commissioner hearing these things. And there were questions.
I very much appreciate that, and I can tag questions off of this and let you go from there if you'd like.
That'd be great.
Okay, so one of the things was the purpose of FEMA's purpose in mapping versus a community's purpose in developing floodplain regulations, and why those are different.
Right. So the flood insurance program was established in 1968, and at that time they were trying to, get a lot of people out of trouble. And the goal was to build an insurance program to bail people out if they get flooded, and then obviously to say that, well, don't keep creating these problems. So they established these standards. They mapped the entire nation, and over time those maps have increased in detail. And at this point, they are, basically sticking to their 20 or 30 year standard now that you can develop in the floodplain and create a 1 foot rise. And if you build a house, it has to be 1 foot above the flood elevation, and that's where those two things are kind of married together. And so then on the City of Lawrence side, in 2001, we revised the regulations and worked with the Planning Commission subcommittee and looked at a lot of those issues about the fact that in reality, what FEMA is doing is creating this sort of endless cycle of flood damage in developing communities. You can meet that standard and then develop upstream and increase flow, right? So that increases and changes the mapping, and now structures that previously complied no longer do. You can put properties into the floodplain as a result of development that were not previously in the floodplain, so they had no idea it was coming. So to try to address those kind of conflicts, we revised those regulations and basically have 3 areas where we were more restrictive. The first is no rise, which Phil has been talking about. If you do development and place fill and change the hydraulics of the channel or the floodplain, you cannot cause the floodwaters to increase at all. That sort of sets that for future reference, you know, and it's not a moving target. The second standard is that residences have to be elevated 2 feet, and that's just additional factor of safety. And then the third part of that was that you have to use future conditions hydrology. And that was at the time kind of a developing idea with FEMA and floodplain managers. And what that says is if you are going to model this floodplain, but 80% of the watershed upstream is undeveloped, then in reality, you're really not looking to the future and you will have problems. And so in Lawrence, it was easy to say that, you know, hey, these are the areas that are not yet developed. We've got a comp plan that shows what those might be. Let's use that when we model the floodplain. And so those 3 pieces really were what we drove in those regulations. And I reviewed them today to see, and all those are still there. And I'm sure the city engineers that are reviewing that, you know, are well versed in that part of that. So those are the comparisons. FEMA is really driven at, you know, a nationwide standard that achieves protect people to a certain extent, reduce flood losses, reduce insurance costs. Whereas as a community, we wanted to do more.
And so what we've seen so far, and I'll let the applicant also respond to make sure I'm being completely fair, the zero rise, we're getting a model that works for that. But the assumption of what happens if this is also developed upstream, that kind of future use planning, you feel like that has not yet been shown in what we've seen in these materials so far?
Well, I assume that, you know, the regulations say that the future conditions hydrology will be the comp plan or some other reasonable assumption. And I am fairly certain that they have not made assumptions about Washington Creek, which is, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 square miles of watershed upstream that is primarily undeveloped. If we were to make assumptions about what that may be in 100 years, then this floodplain looks completely different. And so that's where there's going to be a disconnect. And so that kind of gets to the point of, in the past, developments that we've all reviewed as a community are, you know, Lawrence is a city on a hill. The floodplains reach up from the edges. The development above on the hill is what's feeding the flooding. And so as we've expanded out, we've sort of had this quantifiable thing that we can look at. In this case, it's one of the first times that we're stepping into an entirely new realm. This is putting development downstream from areas that are uncontrolled by the city, unknown for the future, and basically a mass. If you look at Washington Creek, where it comes into the Wakarusa River, it's huge. It's bigger than any natural stream in Lawrence. And so that was the point that I was driving at is this gives me, you know, when they set aside the green space over the floodplains, I sort of had a sigh of relief for the future that, you know, we aren't going to be coming back to these things for this area. That's what gives me pause about this is we're playing with fire a little bit in this floodplain. And I think there might be, you know, a middle ground that gets both interests in the right place. But that's my concern generally, and that's what I raised. You
also made mention about climate change impacting. Can you talk about that?
Yes. In 2014, NOAA updated their rainfall standards with more modern data, and that's what's currently being used for all mapping. That was a good thing because previously it was 1970s data. You can see right there that there were increases in rainfall intensity throughout, and the assumption across the board with FEMA and any floodplain manager in the country is that we will see another update with higher rainfall intensity and different mapping. You get to the point where the conditions in the map are, the assumptions in the map are, have been, you know, modified enough by either increased rainfall or watershed changes that you have to modify the maps. FEMA will absolutely be modifying these maps someday for one reason or another.
Thank you.
Sure.
We've asked a fair number of questions. Are we fair to have public comment at this point? So we'll open this for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience here who would like to give 3 minutes of public comment? If so, you can step up and give us your name and address. Be sure to sign in, which you can also sign in after you've had your talk too.
My name is Margaret Kramar. I live just north of Big Springs, 1966 E100 Road. And I stand opposed to this project. First of all, this development would not add more affordable housing to Lawrence. In a previous, should I just ignore this microphone or? Okay. In a previous presentation, the cheapest housing unit was listed at $350,000. The cheapest. Let's do the math. The average teacher salary in Lawrence is $55,000 per year before taxes, which means the individual is taking home about $4,000 a month. A 30-year mortgage at 6% interest on a $350,000 house is about $2,000 a month. It is unwise to spend half of one's income on housing, and most people do not have several million tucked away somewhere in order to buy housing outright. Secondly, the proposed development will flood. We attended Wetlands Day at the Baker Wetlands this past Saturday, and a naturalist there stated that flooding was inevitable. Also, given with what's happening in California now, how can anyone think that moving some dirt around by grading in a floodplain is more powerful than the rains, which are increasing in velocity and strength due to global warming? When these properties are underwater, who will pick up the tab? The insurance company? The home or business owner? The developer? Finally, this development is immediately adjacent to the Baker Wetlands. There is considerable habitat for humans in the Lawrence vicinity, but for bald eagles, trumpeter swans, and all the riparian plant and animal life, not so much. I can remember the discussions surrounding the South Lawrence Trafficway and the promises that Native American land would not be compromised. But along with all the other promises made to Native Americans, when we look at that area, this promise has been renegotiated, infringed upon, chipped away at, and violated. I personally am having a hard time comprehending why anyone would advocate building more homes for rich people when the downside to this development is more traffic congestion on Iowa Highway 59, which results in more carbon emissions, less green space, and more suburban sprawl. If we want to live on a habitable planet, we are headed in the wrong direction with developments such as these, because whether we like it or not, nature bats last. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Commissioners, for a moment to make some comments. I'm Thad Holcomb, resident of Lawrence on Leonard Street. I'm coming as the moderator of Lawrence Ecology Teams United in Sustainability. I'm also on the Task Force for Climate Change. I'm not speaking for them, but I have had experience on that task force as we're working through. I think the question that was raised right at the first, as you had shown, was one of them was, does really address the interest of Douglas County citizens? I'd like to enlarge that context of who are the citizens. Now, some will respond to me and say, oh, you are evolving a romantic notion, but I say I am bringing to you an ancient tradition, not just from the native indigenous perspective, but from the whole of Western and African understanding, philosophically and theologically, that we are all connected. Dan Wildcat calls it, we are all kinship with all. So does it really address the citizens if you include those as part of the citizens of Douglas County? Does this address it? Yes, and I think unfortunately it does bring up another ancient tradition, and all due respect, I think I want to rename this Boston Commons Pandora's Box. 500 BC, there was a poem And I'm sure some of you vaguely remember it, Works and Days, and it was a case of Pandora, which her husband gave this jar with her not to open, and she did instead. And out of that spilled 7 flatterers, and I won't go into all the details of it, but it was honors, riches, taste, fashion, and false knowledge. It also had fall out of all these 7 bringers of evil: envy, remorse, avarice, poverty, all these different things. And could have been arrogance too in that. It seems that the mess we're in now is at the risk of not understanding we have not connected ourselves with all of our kin. And I think this is one of many projects going on in the United States and here in Lawrence that's perpetuating climate change. Assuming that we have the power to control the flora and fauna and the river, the Wakarusa, the upstream and downstream, by all these kinds of containments of taking out earth, which is sacred, for we must respect it, respect the water and what it counts for. So all of these things cause me to, unfortunately, say, is this a Pandora's box? It's up to you as representing the citizens, and I hope all the citizens now, because we have to do that given what mire we're in now if we don't, of how we approach this today. I appreciate your time. It's a difficult decision to make, but one I think needs to be in consideration to the extent of opposing this project. Thank you much.
Thank you, Thad. Would anyone else like to speak?
Madam Chair, I'll back up a little. Madam Chair, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this issue this evening.
And Steve, please share your name, even though I know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Steve Kelly, 4529 Broadmoor Drive. I'm with the Chamber and the EDC. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening in support of the amendment, and thank you for your service to the county. I'm speaking in support of this measure, of this proposed amendment. The area for which this amendment is being considered was annexed and was intended for the development and has been annexed in the city, the last portion of it, for over a year. This development under consideration would include housing of various types, green space and commercial buildings in what is planned to be a walkable mixed-use neighborhood, which I think is a priority and a desire of the community and of the county. The current plan calls for 176 units of single-family housing and attached townhomes on lots of various sizes, along with 600 apartment units. This community, this county needs housing desperately, particularly single-family housing, and this provides an opportunity to get more units in the market, provide more opportunities for what I call churn in the market, where people can move up into other homes, freeing up homes for folks at different price levels, and I think that's very important. Also, the commercial development contemplated for this project is focused heavily on entertainment and dining options, some of which would provide additional options for locals, but also, as it's planned, at least in what I've seen, there would also be some opportunities that would potentially draw people from the surrounding areas, which would be helpful to our local economy. This project will also include a significant amount of undeveloped space, including a wetlands area, which was discussed earlier. The planning staff has spent a great deal of time working on this project with the developer and others over the last year to develop a plan which protects the floodplain and county residents while providing a product that will generate housing and economic and commercial opportunities. The new interchange at Highway 59 and K10 is designed for this type of traffic level, so it doesn't create a lot of disruption in that way. This amendment changes the proposed use of what was intended for this property, and they discussed it earlier, this idea of auto lots, that is no longer viable or needed, to something that can provide housing and economic generators that benefit Douglas County. Therefore, I ask that you consider positively approval of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I am Tad Kramar, a resident of rural Western Douglas County. I urge you to reject the proposed new Boston sprawl development. Lawrence desperately needs more affordable housing, but this development callously ignores it. As a poor attempt to overlook it, we have heard the bizarre claim that when well-to-do people buy expensive new houses, their existing houses will become available for middle and lower income people. That's a nice try, but real estate generally appreciates in value. So houses previously purchased by upper, middle, and higher income people will sell for even more than when they purchased them, and will certainly not be available or affordable to people with lower incomes. Further, I have found no indication of a thorough analysis of the possible harmful effects this development could have on the adjacent Baker wetlands and the adjacent Wakarusa River. Runoff could cause pollution and erosion. This, along with light and noise pollution, could adversely impact the diverse wetlands wildlife. It would be irresponsible to approve this massive project without a thorough analysis. Traffic on Iowa Street near and north of the proposed development is already often very congested. This development will make traffic congestion even worse. Not a very pleasant gateway to Lawrence. Finally, Lawrence does not need more commercial and retail space. Vacancies are fairly high now and trending higher. In addition, the staff report states, quote, if this project is approved, other approved yet undeveloped commercial nodes may have to extend their development timeframes in order to attract retail tenants, thus potentially underserving these areas of the community. Let's not underserve other areas of our community for this project. Please reject the proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Terry Teresa Wilkie. I live 3221 Yellowstone Drive, Lawrence, Kansas. I'm opposed to the amendment to allow this development. I'm in favor of the protecting the floodplain. I appreciate your comments thus far this evening that show that you have the same state of awareness of the importance of the floodplain, not just for nature, but for property that's in the floodplain. I happen to own one of those in town, and foundations crack and water comes up, and it's in town. Thank you for being aware that we are living in a town on a hill, and so far we haven't had to worry about developing in deeper spots. I note that this development is digging a pond. I wonder if the contour map is taking the ground underneath that pond, and then they're putting it up closer to the traffic way. So then they're saying this is where we get 0% increase, because they're taking all the 20 acres of dirt out and filling it in to make housing development. So we have to look very carefully at this, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is William Steele. I live at 943 Avalon Road in Lawrence, and I stand before you tonight to strongly urge a no vote on the proposed amendment. While I acknowledge the pressing need for more housing in Lawrence, I implore you to consider the pursuit of increased housing should never come at the expense of public safety or rational decision-making, for that matter. First of all, constructing a development of this magnitude on a floodplain is unwise. The reality is it's not a question of if, but when Lawrence will face another flooding event like occurred in 1951 in 1993, or even in 2019. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, San Diego had a 1,000-year flooding event. And if that happens here, which is very likely, or more and more likely because of climate change, residents in or near this proposed development could face evacuation. That's a real possibility. Secondly, numerous experts advise against the fill and build construction method. In fact, just a few months ago, FEMA's advisory council, the Technical Mapping Advisory Council, recommended scrapping their own floodplain policy due to its inherent dangers, environmental harm, and propensity for giving homeowners a false sense of security. This approach also leads to foundation and mold issues, often resulting in costly litigation. Considering the potential legal ramifications, are we willing to subject our municipality to liability by proceeding with this development despite known risks? Historically, municipalities have faced lawsuits for permitting construction in floodplains. And who will bear the financial burden of the cleanup and infrastructure repair when disaster strikes? These critical questions were overlooked in last night's City Commission meeting, where most of the commissioners focused on the economic benefits, the housing benefits, disregarding the long-term consequences. As some of our planning commissioners and others have said, we really must take a holistic view when contemplating amendments to our comprehensive plan. Previous boards and commissions wisely rejected development in this floodplain, recognizing that certain areas must remain untouched. And I really think that we need to respect that precedent. As a Lawrence homeowner and taxpayer, I strongly oppose subsidizing such a risky project, and I urge you to uphold the integrity of our comprehensive plan by voting against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Good evening, Chairwoman Willie and Commissioners. My name is Michael Allman. I'm going to start with a quote from John Haas, a former planning commissioner who wrote the floodplain regulations, and he wrote to you, "The proposed amendment before the commission fails due to noncompliance with Article 12 of the Land Development Code. The study shall assume full development of the watershed, which is an area that's bounded by Highway 40 to the north, Highway 75 to the west, Highway 56 to the south. Full development of the watershed. The H&H study is deficient." He concludes saying, "The primary purpose of Article 12 of the Land Development Code is to prevent development in flood-prone areas." So tonight's comprehensive plan amendment is procedurally deficient and has damaging ecological impacts. Instead of pandering to the wishes of a profit-driven developer, planning staff should follow their own work plan that has the Southern Development Sector Plan scheduled for revision later this year. Our community deserves a more robust public amendment process with the typical steering committee, public notice, review, several drafts, and hearings. The developer, Mr. Phil Bundy, doesn't really need an amendment. Let's look at the acreage. There's 48 acres by K10 that are not in the floodplain. There's 71 acres in the floodplain. There are 45 more acres on the south, mostly floodway, that Mr. Bundy bought from Bob Porter simply to pad his acreage for open space and to allow full build-out of the other acres. And there's 13 acres that he hopes ADOT will provide him. Mr. Bundy can rezone site plan and build on those 48 higher ground acres right now. Without this amendment, without a fill permit. So please deny this amendment. The term auto-related center is not a restrictive zoning category. It's merely one of those 3 comp plan dots on the map. The actual zoning was previously community commercial with dozens of commercial and residential land uses. My conclusion, but if you amend the Southern Development Sector Plan as requested tonight, you will enable development of those additional 71 acres of floodplain. Please deny the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to speak on this item?
Good evening, Melinda Ball, Rawhide Lane, Lawrence, Kansas. Thank you for this opportunity. I urge you to deny this amendment to the comp plan. Developing on a floodplain is a bad idea, especially now and into the future. Atchison County, Missouri and Manhattan, Kansas realized the importance of giving rivers more space. After the flood of 2019, Atchison County decided to let the floodplain restore after the Missouri River levee broke. Manhattan, Kansas has converted residential lots to designated open space on floodplains. Additionally, Charleston, South Carolina has banned the process of fill and regrading for development in floodplains. Formed by Congress in 2012, the Technical Mapping Advisory Council was established to review and make recommendations to FEMA on matters related to the National Flood Mapping Program. TMAC members include specialists from NOAA, FEMA flood experts, representation from U.S. Geological Survey, National Geospatial Program, as well as other vetted professionals. TMAC produces an annual report on the impacts of climate sciences and future conditions and how they may be incorporated into the mapping program. As of October 2023, TMAC's newest recommendations to FEMA include prohibiting the use of fill and regrading as an elevation technique in floodplains. TMAC is also recommending nearly doubling the amount of flood risk zones, which would move millions of people into required flood insurance areas. So, I lost my place. Oh yeah, so nonetheless, it's unclear that this will be adopted due to special interest groups. Nonetheless, the recommendations are the result of increased daily rainfall and less floodplains to cope. The amendment you're looking at today would remove floodplain. The applicant's proclamation that the development will not flood is deceptive. Their Agent 8 study does not factor in climate change, and the study is non-compliant to Article 12 of the Land Development Code, as it does not assume full development of the Wakarusa watershed. To quote Dr. Don Huggins, Kansas Biological Survey, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is now attempting to assess if current reservoirs will be able to accommodate larger, more frequent flood events, and yet reserve enough water in these to accommodate intervening periods of drought. Does Clinton Reservoir have the current capacity and operational flexibility to prevent downstream flooding in the new age of climate change? That's a question for the USACE and must be addressed before any further encroachment in the Wakarusa floodplain. I respect the demand for housing. However, sacrificing floodplains is ill-advised and costly and dangerous. We have other areas in town that really need redevelopment, as well as non-sensitive lands that could be utilized for housing and support commercial usage. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Who would like to be next?
Good evening, Commissioners. I apologize for my scratchy voice. I'm Lisa Harris Friedman. I live in Lawrence. I'm here to ask you to deny the comprehensive plan amendment based on non-alignment with the comprehensive plan about floodplain management. As you mentioned, Commissioner Willie, Chapter 2 talks about strengthening floodplain regulations to mitigate flood hazards and decrease vulnerability of life and property. That's a quote from the plan. I interpret this language to mean that the community wants stronger regulation than our current standards. And I think this is prudent and forward-thinking, especially considering climate change. This proposed project does the opposite, however. Rather than strengthening regulations, planning staff are recommending stretching them to allow for fill and development in the floodplain. And Mr. Struble mentioned tonight that they're looking at every piece of floodplain for development. So we can expect this will not be the first project to come to you. The staff report recommends approval because development would provide no rise to the base flood elevation. And that's based on FEMA floodplain map. And that would give the community the same assurances and meets the intent of the standards. I would argue that it does not give community the same assurances. This is because the method would rely on FEMA, and their own advisory board, as mentioned by others tonight, has said that that's not a sound process. So given this, I think it's unwise for staff to rely on this practice to allow for the proposed development, especially considering the substantial size of the development. You may already know that the area east of the proposed development is already prone to flooding. During heavy rains, sections of the Lawrence Loop have been closed between Louisiana Street and Haskell Street because of flooding, and the underpass at Louisiana Street floods regularly as well. To conclude, our comprehensive plan sets out what kinds of land are intended to be protected for safety or economics. And floodplain is one of those. It's clearly set out in the plan to be protected, and I hope you will consider that as you consider this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for the time. My name is Dawn Hawkins. I live on the Rock Creek Public Access Road to Clinton Lake. Being so close to the lake, I witnessed firsthand the flooding of 2019, the highest water level that Clinton Lake has ever seen. The Corps of Engineers was not able to release water all summer because of flooding downstream all the way up the Kansas River, in which the Wakarusa flows, and the Kansas River flows into the Missouri River. We are literally so upstream that we were not able to release water into the Wakarusa to save our own areas, and lost many trees and considerable erosion around the lake. To this day, you can see the high water line in the trees around the lake, hundreds of which died. The Corps has been spending a lot of money trying to replace trees and taking out dead trees from that flood. That year, we saw wildlife shift uphill, particularly snakes, into our yard. You can even see the invasive zebra mussels several feet up in the trees, a stark example of the cascading effect on ecosystems that flooding causes. This kind of event will become more and more common, as you know. We need to maintain the Wakarusa watershed, or we jeopardize not just this area in question, but also the areas around the Wakarusa, Kaw, and Missouri rivers, as well as homes and public areas around Clinton Lake. This project is not likely to generate much in property taxes, as my guess is that the applicant will apply for considerable incentives. I don't think we know this yet. The rural and urban community does not want this. We have decades of history to show that the Haskell, Baker, Wakarusa wetlands are so important to us that we fought very hard to keep the South Lawrence Trafficway out of the wetlands, which resulted in a ramp to nowhere sitting there for years, until developers were successful in pushing the SLT through with only lip service to protecting the wetlands. We not only care about the watershed, ecosystem, and individual species, we care deeply about the cultural history of this area that was part of Haskell since it was a boarding school when many children were taken from their parents and so many died. I also sent you an email that was too late to get into the agenda packet, but I just wanted to add these few points. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone like to be next? I'll give another call. Is there anyone else here in person who would like to give public comment on this item? Do we have anyone online?
Yes, commissioners, we've got several folks online.
Let me ask fellow commissioners, would you need a break? And then we will do online comment.
Okay,
So
we're going to go ahead and move Sarah into the panel, so if you can accept that, you'll be our first public commenter when we come back.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We will take a break for 5 minutes. Thank you. So just to recap where we are at what progress we have so far, we've had in-person public comment. We're going to open it up for online public comment, and then we will turn back to the applicant to give them a chance to respond to public comment before we will bring it back up to the commission. And so Sarah, we have someone queued up to give public comment.
Sarah, you are in the panel. You can provide your public comment. Patrick Schmitz, you are next, and I'll move you in after Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to say that I strongly oppose the proposed amendment to the 2040 plan to allow development further south of the South Lawrence Trafficway. The environmental and ecological concerns of development in the Wakarusa wetlands are well established. This on top of the historical and cultural significance and just the history of what has happened there, like we would think that the only decent answer would be to recognize that no is no. And I don't understand why the development community continues to erode at the current boundary and trying to expand further south besides profit motive. There's plenty of ways that we can improve housing and all of these other things that they claim to do with their plan without jeopardizing a vital ecosystem and wildlife that happens to live there. Additionally, I hope that this can be used as an opportunity to send a firm message to the development community that you can continue to work as hard as you want and spend as much money as you want trying to push our city further south beyond where it was supposed to go, but it will just be a waste of money to you. Like, I don't know how many times people have to try the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So thank you so much for your questions tonight, which established that a lot of the claims were quite literally contraindicated by the plan. You can't create more open space by eliminating it and just making it publicly accessible. Like, what kind of mental gymnastics are we doing here? Anyway, I have another meeting to get to. Thank you so much. Bye.
Sarah, can you give us your last name first?
Oh, sorry, Anise.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Patrick Schmitz, you can provide your comment. Earl Bates, you will be next. I'll move you into the panel.
Thank you, Chair Willie and commissioners and county staff. I'm Patrick Schmitz, a citizen of Lawrence and CEO of an organization with approximately 380 team members, ranging from entry-level positions all the way to specialty professionals earning a very good income. I will refer you to page 130 of the packet for a letter I submitted in November to the November of 23 to the Planning Commission. I'm obviously not going to read that to you, as you likely have already read that. I will simply point out the importance of housing of all types and price ranges in our community. As you know, I am heavily invested in housing of all types, and especially affordable housing and housing those who are currently unhoused. But I'm also very much invested in creating and supporting the creation of housing for the members of our community that are here to serve and work in our community. This project helps us with that and helps create a positive ripple effect in the housing market and creates opportunities for our staff as more housing becomes available. I have team members that want single-family housing, and it's hard to find that, and it's hard to afford it. And this plan helps make that issue more possible and helps secure our critical workforce. As we all know, housing cannot be affordable if more housing does not exist. It's simply part of the laws of supply and demand. I ask that you support this plan amendment as it moves this project along forward towards becoming a reality. Thank you for your time, the opportunity to speak, and your service to our community.
Thank you.
Earl Bates, you are next, and then Samantha Peterson, we will move you into the panel.
Thank you, Commissioners. Yes, my name's Earl Bates. I live at 1127 East 1200 Road. We're about a mile southwest of this proposed project. And I strongly urge you, Commissioners, to vote against allowing this new Boston crossing to proceed. I could not really add a whole lot more to what all of the very well-read and very smart folks have already contributed. But I would just like to repeat some of what they said. This is in the floodplain, and you're just asking for trouble. I saw it happen in Denton, Texas, with the flooding with the lakes there. Omaha, Nebraska, right in the middle of town when I lived there. They didn't plan on some of this. They thought it'd be okay. It was not. It's a dangerous place. Also, the light and the noise pollution is going to really hurt our quality of life around here. And a lot of the people in our area, there's going to be damage to the wetlands. Traffic congestion is going to be worse than it already is. And as far as the downtown development, this will really compete with what people, their attention will be drawn to the south and not to going downtown, where those restaurateurs and all those retail people down there could use help, not hurt them like this. It's an unneeded sprawling shopping plaza. We've got enough fast food places to go to, and it's a general disturbance of peace and tranquility in a really natural green space over there. There's a risk of gas and oil leaking over there out of the gas stations. And it's going to ruin the Wakarusa River, and the Baker wetlands, I think, will be damaged. Also, I must add, this process has moved too fast. I know there was a lot of groundwork done before this, but as far as letting the public know, I just found out about some of these meetings recently. And I just think that it's got to slow down a bit. Whatever you do here, I think you need to take a better, closer look at it. Now, Lawrence might need some more affordable housing, but $350,000 to start off with is not affordable. I think that's a mistake. And we could talk about growth. I won't go really into this too much, but I wonder what it means, what growth means. If it means more of everything, well, I'm not sure that's a good thing. As a guitar player, I used to hate it when the harmonica player would just blow through the whole thing. I'd say less is more, my friend. Maybe that's what we need to do, is have a little perspective on this. This could be a great project, just not at this price and not where you're going to put it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Samantha Peterson is next. KRC, I will move you into the panel. Samantha, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Samantha Peterson. I live at 1121 East 13th Street here in Lawrence. I am opposed to the amendment. So my family moved here in the 90s, and through that time, I've watched the city grow massively. And I think because of that, we need to be extremely cautious about how we decide to develop what land we have left going forward. For this project, I feel like the commercial space is redundant. There's already a ton of stuff out in the South Iowa area for people to eat at and shop and everything like that. And of course, we are always in need of affordable housing. However, we are not in need of super expensive housing that's probably destined for catastrophic flooding. Based on this meeting, to me, it sounds like the county is in the process of a lot of evaluation and understands the complexity of this area. And I think it would be really smart to let unbiased people conduct these studies and do these evaluations before we greenlight moving forward with any big projects. So with all of that, respectfully, I ask that you please vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
KRC.
Hi, my name is Rob Richardson. I'm sorry my name doesn't show up correctly on there. It's kind of hard to figure that out on Zoom sometimes. I want to tell you, first of all, the sky's not falling with all this stuff. There's a lot going on in this development, but the statement about upstream development not being considered is entirely false because it is considered. Your regulations mean that there will be no additional flow of water or intensity of water coming from those developments. That's what your regulations say. They have been inherently calculated into the development. And when people say that a public engineer has given you a document that's false, without that kind of perspective, it's quite frankly slander. And we need to make sure that when we talk about these things, that we absolutely know for a fact what we're talking about. The regulations protect this development and the upstream development. We need housing in Douglas County and Lawrence. I work with the EDC, and you might have heard that Panasonic is building a big plant just down the road. That is going to increase the demand for housing in Douglas County by some measure, maybe a little bit, maybe a lot. And if we don't build more housing, everything in town will become more unaffordable and less attainable. We need housing of all kinds. There's other proposals in the city for affordable housing. This one isn't necessarily affordable housing, but we need the housing here. There's a 2-foot freeboard when you build adjacent to the floodplain that allows you to have some confidence that even if it gets worse, the new development here is not going to be impacted by it. It used to be a foot, and now it's 2 feet. I mean, people recognize they need a little bit more safety there, but it is okay to develop in the floodplain. You can fill in the floodplain and you can develop on it, and it can last for a very long time. A majority of the city of Boston is built on what used to be ocean, and it works. You have to do it correctly. You have to take your time, and you have to make sure that the fill is done right, that the stream banks are protected, and that's what they're doing with this development. Please don't let the scare tactics of people saying that this can't be done, that the Corps of Engineers doesn't know what they're doing yet. They modeled Clinton Lake on it's called most probable rainfall or something along those lines. Now that might have changed a little bit, but for the storms we're having, there's plenty of capacity in that dam. Now they can choose to release it when they want to, and that might cause us problems, but generally they try not to do that. So, they learn from their mistakes. They study what happens downstream from them when they let out water, and they amend their policies based on that. I think we're just fine right here, right now, to do this development, to provide more housing and other development opportunities for the people of Lawrence currently and future, because like I said, Panasonic is one place that's coming, but there's more coming behind that, and new people are going to want to live in Lawrence, and they're going to be able to buy houses here at some point, and it's going to make everything else less attainable. So please, I implore you to vote in favor of housing, because when we don't build more housing, we make all the other housing more expensive and less attainable. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else online?
Commissioners, that's it.
Okay. With that, we'll close public comment and bring it back to, actually will be the applicant to give a chance to respond to public comment.
We're available for any questions that you might have. I think we've heard a lot of this before tonight, and we heard it last night. I would make a comment about process. Part of my job is to make sure that my client gets a fair cut, a fair opportunity to address information. And a great deal of effort has gone into this planning process. We've been at it for over half a year. Information comes in, planner will filter it. They'll often solicit feedback from the developer. The development gets better for it. Sometimes there's a reasonable explanation for why things are. Sometimes we make adjustments to development. It's taken a long time to get to this place. But tonight we have something kind of novel. You know, we have solicitation from county staff with an introduction of new testimony that hasn't been given to the planning staff. Developer hasn't had the opportunity to look at it. It's a little disappointing from a planning perspective that we can't be given what is otherwise public information from county staff about their position on the project. So on behalf of my client, I think I just need to make that known, that this has been a long planning process, and it would be nice to have the information that the county is going to use to rely on in their determinations. Beyond that, we think we have good explanations for why things are the way they are with our development. We'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. We may still have some. So with that, we'll bring it back to the commission for further conversation or questions, comments. I would lead off, if that's all right. And I'm going to start with all of the things that I like about the project. So just put that into the mix also. This node, which has a great transportation network to it, I think is slated for development. I would be in support of development at this node outside of the floodplain, whether that's housing or commercial development. I do think that the current comprehensive plan as it's mapped for this future auto-related is tying our hands, and that needs to be undone. I would welcome that conversation. I would welcome the conversation that that the land within that node to the southeast corner of K10 and 59 Highway would offer us housing especially. I'm interested in housing of all types at all price points, recognizing that every time we talk about affordable housing, we have to recognize it's both and, that we need subsidized housing as well as market rate housing to build that inventory. We are way, way behind. I don't think that the need for housing means that we do not also apply what I believe to be common sense in getting some of these other analyses done on the floodplain portion of the project. I have no qualms with the engineer's modeling. I'm not digging into that at all, and not suggesting that anything was done wrong there, just that there are problems with the data set that goes into that. The Corps of Engineers was not consulted. There are conditions that make this area uniquely prone to flooding because of the timing of things with the lake that we need to talk about if we're going to look at pushing that floodplain boundary. So also add that we have a 50-year-old reservoir with a 75-year lifespan. So it will continue to silt in. That is how what they are designed to do. Then we will have a reckoning as a community for what happens with that too. So the ability to control, to capture floodwaters will also continue to decrease over the lifespan of the reservoir. That's just the nature of what they are. So with that, I will stop talking and turn it back to other commissioners.
So we have to be clear on our process here, and that this is a comp plan amendment review. It is an adjustment. I will say I'm a little troubled at how specific it is. In other site and area plans, it is broader strokes than what I'm seeing on this one. This one is very specific lots, how big they are, and even some of the discussion, and I appreciate all the public comment, gets very specific. This is as broad as we get from a planning perspective, and we're really drilling down into, is it affordable housing, how many, those types of things. We as a county commission don't see the site plan. We don't even look at zoning, and I feel like we sort of walked into that zoning space here at times, and I'm a little nervous. So I want to ask Sandy, because I have a little question around that. And it's specifically, if there are two bodies that have to approve this, and if one body doesn't approve it, well, three bodies, yeah, thank you. So far we've had two, right? If one of the three doesn't approve it, what would be the next step for the developer? Does that mean this project is
dead. Can you walk us through that?
Commissioner
Yes.
Kelly, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
can I just add on to that? Sandy, I'm curious, to add on to Commissioner Kelly's question, is there a possibility that a different such plan would come forward after the fact, or that the city staff has any draft proposal for amending the Southern Development Plan? Because the source of this proposal is from the applicant, not from city or county staff.
That is correct. So let me start answering your question kind of in the reverse. This is an applicant-driven request for an amendment to a comprehensive plan, and we see those all the time where they are project-specific. The idea that we would go back and revisit the revised Southern Development Plan, it is on the Planning Department's work plan. I will tell you that that work plan is out of date. We are currently working on 2 plans that were scheduled for 22. So we are behind on that work. So this is one of many plans. And I think in the year, had we completed the 4 plans in 22, 23 timeframe, we would be working on 2 more plans before we even got to this one. So to say that this plan is going to be updated this year, I think is not realistic. So there's that piece of it. So we do not have a staff-generated plan, and I say staff, meaning we would host the normal comprehensive plan amendments that would be the full scope of public, that public process that includes neighborhood meetings and SWOT analyses and all of those different components. And we've been looking at everything within that plan, not just an isolated piece. So at the project-specific level, there are 3 bodies that must approve a plan: the Planning Commission, the City Commission, and the County Commission. Because we are a joint city-county planning agency, we have a joint comprehensive plan that is Plan 2040. If one of the 3 bodies does not approve the comprehensive plan amendment, the comprehensive plan amendment dies. That is the end of this work. That does not stop the applicant's ability to continue with the development process. The property is annexed into the city. It does have to be rezoned to an appropriate city zoning designation. The applicant has requested zoning. That zoning will go forward to the City Commission at a future meeting. What would happen if this body does not, if you do not approve the comprehensive plan amendment? That means what staff would need to do is to update the findings of fact that go with those zonings and provide basically a memorandum how the zoning request fits for that one finding of fact. There are 9 to 10 findings of fact for every zoning. This is just one component of that. So it does not stop the applicant's project. They will certainly have to answer more questions in front of the City Commission with the zoning, but it doesn't kill the project.
I appreciate that clarity. That wasn't my understanding, so I don't think we need to work on making sure we're clear on that moving forward.
Absolutely.
These are muddy waters. I don't know, yeah, so to speak, because there's just so many processes at play, and this confluence of them that is making things murky. I just don't know how else to describe it in terms of sequencing of events, how one course of action or not a course of action might make the dominoes fall in which direction. And so it's hard because I'm trying to stay focused on what a process is and how narrow a question before us might be, even though the presentation we've received tonight, the application process, it's all cumulative and has all this context. And I love context, so I'm not mad about that. But it definitely like muddies the waters in terms of trying to figure out the sequencing of this and how narrow the question before us in front of us, because it is interesting to me that, and I say this as the commissioner who has the least experience with our comprehensive plan in general, with planning items, period. Obviously, my fellow commissioners are former planning commissioners, so they have a big edge on me, which is why I let them ask all the questions, because I knew they'd cover all the points that I had on my brain, and they did.
I don't think they encountered this on their time.
So this discussion has been helpful for me tonight in clarifying some things, but I still feel a little hung up on the specificity of this proposed plan amendment and whether or not it really has implications for what all the rezoning looks like, because and I guess my other question that it brings up, and a few commenters talked about this, and Sandy, maybe you even said something about it in your earlier presentation about, well, now I've lost my train of thought just a little bit, but just trying to understand what the current restrictions are. Like, so I appreciate the fact that this comprehensive plan amendment has not been updated to reflect things like the boundary of the Baker wetlands, the boundary of the SLT since it's been changed, that there's some basic things that need to change. And to Commissioner Willie's point, you know, some stuff that should be addressed, right? But I'm not sure about all the other stuff and how specific it gets. So help me understand what in the current, this auto categorization, I forget what the exact phrase of it was, restricts in terms of development, because couldn't they ask for variances, for example, after the rezoning and the site planning process?
So it depends. In the normal course of action, there are certain steps a developer would take. You would do either annexation or a comprehensive plan amendment. You can either do those concurrently or individually. You would do the comprehensive plan amendment depending on how that worked. Then you would go and do your zoning, and then you would go and do your plating, and then you would go and do your site plan. That's the normal process. We do allow developers to stack processes and do things concurrently to really be more efficient about some things. This property inherently is complex, absolutely. One of the significant hurdles the applicant must complete is this evaluation by FEMA. That is out of staff's hands. They have to provide certain documentation. They have provided that documentation. It is in review. So while city staff has looked at components of it and said, okay, think you meet the no rise, there are additional components. The city has not signed off yet. They're hopeful that the city will sign off on that application for this project to move to FEMA to adjust the floodplain boundary. That is a separate process out of all of this. It must happen, and they cannot develop the project that they want to develop without that happening. So that is a condition that is actually applicable to the subdivision. It's not applicable to a comprehensive plan. You do not have to have a comprehensive plan that has been approved by FEMA. Never has been the requirement, and it likely will never be the requirement. Now, if the community's desire is to say, we will henceforth go forward and designate all regulatory floodplain, whatever that looks like, however that is defined by FEMA in a plan, and that will be open space, and that's kind of how it's been treated in the past, then that's a comprehensive plan component of how we're going to organize land use from the plan side. And then we look at, okay, when we have a specific development application come in, what can you do within those things? Because we do allow, by city code, allow development to occur in portions of the regulatory floodplain. It's to a rigorous and high bar of requirement to build in the regulatory floodplain. If the applicant is successful in their work to try to amend that boundary, we're not even going to be talking about floodplain anymore. I mean, there's still going to be components of it, and we'll still be looking at drainage studies and setbacks and stormwater runoff and all of those other kind of components. But we're dealing in the universe of the regulations that are adopted today. So while there may be technical advisories out there about certain things, I cannot tell an applicant that they have to do something that is in a technical advisory. I think the only body that gets to do that is the FAA. Does that help some?
So that's what's troubled me sort of about this whole thing. I think there are a lot of things that we have aspirations for. I personally have an aspiration that we would stop building in the floodplain. But the city has regulations that allow building to happen in the floodplain. This is on city annex land. And as much as I don't like their choices, it's their annex land, and I want to be cautious as a county directing our city partners on what to do. It's not too long ago that we had a Wakarusa extension that we felt as a commission was very important, and some of our city commissioners took issue with it. I want to make sure that we're learning from that experience, and so that's something that's been on my mind about this. I think I have large aspirations for our open space plan. I read the comprehensive plan as saying we want to grow open space, not reduce it. And yet we don't have an open space plan done yet. And that's a goal within there. We don't have open space policy. We don't have any way to maybe do some sort of land swap. You know, if you're going to take open space out, is there a way that the applicant could bring some open space in? Is there some ways we could do that? And so in a lot of ways, in a lot of the public comment that I heard, that's exactly where I want to be, but we're not there yet. And I think it's hard to apply where we want to be to the application that's in front of us now. And that's really where I've been challenged on this one. I think it's really tricky to say, well, the comprehensive, and we get this all the time, and to all the public commenters, I really do appreciate it. But it happens a lot. Like, I read this part of the comprehensive plan and it says do this, so follow that part. And I was working with the applicant to say, well, I can find another part of the comprehensive plan that says this, right? It is a document of competing values. It's my fault. It's Lisa Harris's fault. You know, we worked on it together. It's not perfect, right? Commissioner Willie, I think, spent some time on it. It's not perfect, and it is all aspirational. What I think that means for us is we as a community need to move faster on getting these plans outlined so that we can really say, this is what's in our comprehensive plan. This is the policy. This is the plan. Let's follow that. Because while I'm not happy with what the city approved last night, I understand why they did, and they just chose a different set of values. And I'm real nervous in this space about saying, I know more than you about land that's been annexed in the city.
I agree with you, Commissioner Kelly. That's where I'm sitting with it too, and trying to appreciate the very narrow scope of the question before us, and the only question related to this plot of land, these plots of land, this potential theoretical project, which, to the point that's been made a few times, I think, you know, could look like a bunch of other different things. This is what it looks like today. This is what the concept is right now. But as our packet shows, there's been many iterations of that. There could be more to come. There's lots of other steps in the process and points at which I think a lot of the public comment that we've heard and questions that have been asked by commissioners and concerns that we have pinpointed are valid to dig into. But I tend to agree with you, Commissioner Kelly. I think that we are in a space of having to be mindful of the fact that this is not unincorporated Douglas County, that it is annexed for development. How and where that development takes place within that land is yet to be determined, and theoretically could look like exactly as we see it right now today on the map, and could look completely and radically different, a year from now, based on how a variety of votes go and processes and whether or not approvals are gotten. So I am trying to, I have a lot of reservations about this. I just want to be clear about that. And I think that it's been clear by questions from Commissioner Willie and Commissioner Kelly earlier that there are lots of concerns to be addressed about this. And we at the county talk a lot about concerns around building on floodplain and working actively with residents in the unincorporated area to avoid that, and to buy out properties when and where we can. That's a topic of conversation that, to your point, Commissioner Kelly, I think has, maybe it holds different level of value for us than it might for the city of Lawrence or city of Eudora, city of Baldwin, or city of Lecompton for that matter. We are all independent bodies, and in this situation of having a joint comprehensive plan, this is sort of these are the murky waters sometimes that we're in, where we have to appreciate that some things are not totally in our court, right? All the other decisions to be made are in the city of Lawrence's court, so to speak, and we have a very narrow question before us, and if we approve it along with city commission and planning commission, is not necessarily a foregone conclusion that the development will happen as it is laid out today, or even at all, quite frankly, because as we just heard from Sandy, reiterated that sort of she didn't use this word, but the linchpin of approvals is really the FEMA approval, and we can keep unpacking sort of what FEMA standards and purposes are versus what our local standards and concerns are. But yeah, I think I'm just sitting with the fact that it's a pretty narrow question in front of us, even though I do not like the idea of any development in any floodplain, and I think it's worth avoiding. But that part's not our call, and I recognize that.
I very much appreciate the points raised by my fellow commissioners, and I too have kind of try to figure out what is the narrow question being asked of us, and what is our response to that. And the narrow question, as I view it, is: are we willing to accept half or less of the open space in a revised plan from what we had before? And I really look at Plan 2040 being the document that we are starting from, and it's the one that is in place, recognizing we have other plans that are in the works that we're highly dedicated to. But that, to me, the standard for how much does this change comply, recognizing that there are competing values within that document by a lot, but the preservation of floodplain, the need to increase protections for the floodplain, the value for open space, all of these things are very strongly worded in Plan 2040. And I think as we evaluate things, not in terms of how the city looks at things, and they have a different set of values they can apply to it, but applying our county values to it. We know we've had a lot of experience with flooding. We have things that we're working on to understand that better. Those things have not even been asked in some ways for this plan. I think not addressing with the Corps of Engineers for this property is a piece of that. But I would look at it from the county's set of values and say, I don't think I can support this particular question that's been brought before us because of the erosion of open space and floodplain that is inherent in this question. If a different question were asked that allowed for development north of that waterway that divides the property, I would be much more interested in that. But as it stands, it's not something that I'm comfortable supporting.
I want to speak a little bit to those who provided public comment. We got quite a few letters, and I think what happens in a lot of these situations is we have a specific application or a specific project that comes before us, and that's what sharpens our focus. But what I would ask is if we as a community are valuing things like protecting the floodplain, we need to be pushing on all of our governmental entities to say, we need to look at what the rules are about floodplain and move that up your work plan, move that up your priority plan. If we really value open space, we need you to get engaged with our open space plan. And we need you to ask your city commissioners to say, I want you to embrace the open space plan, because what concerns me a little bit here, no, it concerns me a lot, is that there seems to be differences between, as Commissioner Reed sort of said, what we value as a county, maybe, and what the importance we put on floodplain, and what we value around open space, and what is the city of Lawrence. Because on these edges, this is where we're going to get in conflict. So we've got to figure out a way to move those plans up the priority list so we can be clear on it. Because my worry is, as I asked the applicant, like, how many times is this going to happen? I'm sure the applicants would really like to know, like, can we do it in the floodplain or not? Or do we just ask? Or because they're sort of in that wiggle zone. So, excuse me. So for those who provided public comment, thank you. It doesn't end here. Keep talking to us, keep talking to your city commissioners, because we've got to do a better job of, if we value open space, we've got to get policies in place. We've got to figure out how an applicant can say, hey, I know I'm taking open space out here, but I can give something back here. What are those trade-offs that we can make so that we can continue to think about how to preserve that really important land, and look at open space maybe a little bit differently than parks. It can also be just preserving land that is untouched. So as a commissioner, I feel sort of hemmed in on this one. I will say that, and I know for some that feels like it's a cop-out, and I don't mean it to be a cop-out, but I also want to honor my colleagues just down Massachusetts Street and where their values are, and see if we can get to a place where we're in better agreement on these things. So as we move forward with more development that's on the edges of the community, we can be more aligned in what we're thinking.
Any other comments? Or questions or motions?
Could just say the comment out loud that I'm feeling pretty uncertain about I'm uncomfortable with it. That's what I think is probably the more accurate word, which leads to uncertainty about whether or not to support it, because I think, while appreciating the sort of narrow question in front of us, because of the specificity of the application, this particular application, and that, specific to reducing the amount of available open space in that particular area and node, that is giving me a lot of pause, because I think it's just hard for me not to be curious about what an amendment for the Southern Development Plan amendment would look like if it were proposed through sort of what a typical process, well, maybe I shouldn't say typical, because we heard, and it's true that applicants and developers certainly submit these comprehensive plan amendments too, but I don't know, I think I'm struggling a little bit with that part of the process. And just fundamentally, as has been mentioned here a couple of times, in terms of open space and how we value that, and you're right, Commissioner Kelly, we don't have the plan adopted yet. We don't have policies in place. We are in a development phase of that. And yet it's such a key component to this particular conversation that it's hard not to factor that in particular, that for me, a value that I hold quite a bit of weight towards is specifically protecting the Wakarusa Valley and the floodplain that stretches west to east. So I'm struggling to support this, and what I think I heard in Sandy's explanation is that, you know, all these things being sort of combined together for efficiency, which makes sense to me, also means that like other processes, including all those rezoning requests, are in progress, and that this would impact those processes, but it does not stop them dead in the water either. So I'm doing a little bit of thinking out loud, which is always, you know, the fun part of being a commissioner in a public forum and processing information with my fellow commissioners. But in this very moment, I'm feeling a little stuck and I don't know where to go with that. Trying to think of questions that might help me clarify more. But I just needed to say that out loud.
I have a question for Sandy real quick. So we've talked this evening that we're awaiting the FEMA plan and we can't really do there's assumptions being made about the FEMA plan, I think. One of the things, I just don't know, I'm not proposing this yet, I'm just thinking about it, right? One of the things we could do is say, if there is a significant change to the topography of that space that would cause the need for it, that may make our southern plan look different, right? And we could defer it back to the Planning Commission and the City Commission and say, we want to see the results of that FEMA application. I'm just watching your face. Like, again, just like you, Commissioner Reed, I'm thinking out loud here, and that's, for an elected official, trust me, that's a very unsafe place to be.
So this morning, I met with Randy Larkin to have a little bit of a conversation about procedures. And one of the things that I did was pulled up the Kansas statute about comprehensive plans. And after reading it, I sent an email back to Randy and said, here's what I read. And he said, you're right, but. And so I walked away a little bit confused as well. I believe that you have the ability to make a condition, and then that would go back to the Planning Commission, and then they would consider that, and then their action would go to the City Commission, and they would consider that. It is a bit unwieldy. I think that is the process, but I can't confirm that.
So, yeah, so, you know, would that be beneficial to continue the item till we can get further legal clarity? And then also, I do want to be respectful of, while I do not believe the county commission is necessarily, there was no change in the staff recommendation on this project. There was additional information that's always provided at the county commission level beyond what planning staff does, but I also want to be respectful of the applicant to be able to meet with county staff and to answer any questions or concerns that were raised in this meeting that were not available to the applicant before the meeting as well. So that would be something that could also happen in the interim.
Can we get a response perhaps from Patrick?
Sandy, you may be able to confirm this. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this. This is something that I've worked with Jeff Crick and Amy Miller on. In addition to the range of applications that you're referring to, we have site plans, platting. One of the things that we have to do is called a floodplain permit. County is familiar with these things. It's actually a series of permits. In the discussions about this development, the developer obviously cannot move forward with the expectation that we can go grade any portion of this and have the expense and devote the resources to this without land use entitlements. And so we had a series of discussions, and ultimately what was decided was that we would tie the FEMA approval to the floodplain permit. And if the FEMA approval comes back in anything other than what we applied for, the floodplain permit is triggered and it's a condition of that floodplain permit, we are not allowed to go out and grade. So I think in some level, this condition that you're talking about is already cooked into the process, and it was contemplated by the city planning staff. Is that something that you feel comfortable confirming, Sandy? But this has been a number of discussions, and it's primarily been Jeff and Amy, because Amy is the floodplain coordinator. But it is something that we talked about, and it's obviously a concern from the developer's standpoint. If FEMA says anything other than what we expect them to say, we need to reshape this. Our rezonings have to change. Comp plan, at some level, we have some colors on that map that would probably change a little bit. So I think we are, unfortunately, already tied to this condition. Fortunately or unfortunately, maybe perhaps fortunately for you. At least that is the developer's position on this. I'll leave it at that unless you have any questions.
Since I have you here, can I have you respond? I had asked a question earlier and I didn't really get a chance to make sure that you responded to it also. The question of whether or not the modeling study was done with respect to potential future upstream development.
I would have to have Philip for that because my engineering speak is not up to par.
Philip Struble, what's upstream?
Well, if you're familiar with watersheds, I think we can start there, but we could also narrow it to, we have a Tier 3 future development for the city of Lawrence, and a great deal of land that is in the watershed upstream from this project would be included in that. I don't think anybody has put a lot of thought into how much of that would become impervious surface.
So the answer to that question is we've hired a consultant who specializes in the floodplain modeling out of Kansas City. And his extent upstream is the areas that are tributary from the city of Lawrence into the Wakarusa River. If you're talking about Washington Creek, the answer would be no. That's not included. So, my question revolves around what's your time frame, right? I mean, if it's the 100 years, which is what Chad threw out, which is probably realistic, then, that's well beyond any kind of time frame that we ever deal with. But if we're talking about the K10 corridor and the properties immediately around there, and that are shown in the 2020 comprehensive plan map, then that's reasonable to assume that would be included. But where I'm always concerned about, upstream is an awfully big area, and it involves timeframes and a lot of assumptions that are way beyond the scope of what we do.
Thank you.
And Phil, just to be clear, when you said 100 years, you weren't talking about the 100-year floodplain. You were talking about 100 years of development, right?
100 years of timeline.
Yeah, that's
yes,
what I heard
yes.
too, but I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure because we talk about both here. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to make a motion and see what happens. I'm going to move to approve a comprehensive plan amendment CPA 23-00186 to adopt joint city ordinance number 10020, county resolution number 2404.
Are there any conditions with that? There was some discussion about it.
Let's see what happens. I'm willing to put on some let's see what happens. If someone wants to make a second and offer an amendment, I'd be up for that.
Maybe. We'll pitch it here first. So does it fail for lack of second? Okay. A motion that fails for lack of second. Do you want to try again? You want somebody else to take a stab?
I've taken my shot.
I don't know that we have this as an option to move forward, so I put it out there and then you can rein me back in. I would not be comfortable, but would be willing to approve a comprehensive plan amendment that removed the southern developable portions and put that back to open space. There are two different sections, one's yellow, one's orange, I think, that are below that, that are between the drainage area and the Wakarusa River. I don't even know that we have the ability to do that, so pitch it to Sarah or Sandy.
I would look to Sandy for this.
And it might not get a second either. So. Yeah, feel free to confer if you need to before Sandy responds.
You got to use the microphone for the record.
I understand the intention to pass a resolution that is supported by the body here. We've been through this analysis several times. This has been offered up by multiple stakeholders. This is a prevailing concern. It is not within a feasible development. It will kill the development in terms of if we had to do that. I think for ease of clarity, we'd rather just receive a simple resolution. But
For the record, I am not legal counsel. I will read to you a section out of KSA 12-747. And it begins in the middle of paragraph F. Upon the adoption or amendment of any such plan or part thereof by adoption of the appropriate resolution by a majority vote of all members of the Planning Commission, a certified copy of the plan or part thereof, together with written summary of the hearing whereon, shall be submitted to the governing body. No comprehensive plan shall be effective unless approved by the governing body as provided in this section. The governing body either may, 1, approve such recommendation by ordinance in a city or resolution by in the county, override the Planning Commission's recommendation by a 2/3 majority vote, or may return the same to the Planning Commission for further consideration, together with a statement specifying the basis for the governing body's failure to approve or disapprove if the governing body returns it to the Planning Commission's recommendation, and then it goes on to talk about what the Planning Commission's role is. Beyond that, I cannot provide any other enlightenment.
Commissioner, I'm a little concerned that I would like to have legal counsel review that.
My next
So
question,
it's
yes.
Making me uncomfortable.
Okay.
It seems like maybe a continuation of this conversation. It could be helpful per sort of, I think Sarah alluded to this before as an option, in particular maybe for, to also allow for time for the applicant to have further discussion with county staff and make sure that they feel that they have all available information that commissioners have as one reason, and now perhaps maybe some opportunity to get legal counsel's feedback on whether or not an amendment to the resolution is feasible.
So are we looking possibly at a motion to defer for the applicant to have an opportunity to talk with, I would also say the Corps of Engineers and county staff and bring back any, I don't know if there'd be any different recommendation.
And the guidance you'd be directing staff to get would be to clarify what options are available to the county commission related to the comprehensive plan amendment. And I'm saying this out loud so I can go back and listen to it tomorrow and remember what I said. What direction could we make an alternate amendment based off of what was already said, voted on by the city commission and the planning commission.
Correct.
Are
That
you,
is-
that's what you want me to do?
to go back and ask legal staff if we have the option to do that. I know when we were passing the comprehensive plan, any changes that would be made, and that certainly happened a lot with Horizon 2020, got passed back to the other bodies. So additions or changes were made. That was not a land use question at that time. That was text related. So my assumption would be that it would follow somewhat the same pattern, that if we made a change to that, it would not be binding until that was approved by the other two bodies.
Becky came off, turned her camera on. If you want to offer anything, Becky, I'm all yours.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to confirm that if this body made any recommendations that were different than what the City Commission or Planning Commission had voted on, it basically would go back to those bodies for them to consider the changes that were proposed tonight. So that's as Commissioner Willie pointed out, that is the process that we did in updates to our comprehensive plan. It would be similar in this instance as well.
Thank you very much, Becky. Sir, is that give you enough, or do we still need to have legal counsel?
I think what I would be hearing is I don't know that you need legal counsel to answer that question. You would be sending it back to the Planning Commission, the City Commission, if you decided to pass that motion that still doesn't have a second.
Patrick, do you want to respond?
I just want to clarify, I didn't make a formal motion yet, just suggesting that deferral was a consideration.
And I was speaking to a modification, not a deferral. But if we were going to defer, what do you want me to do? Yeah.
On behalf of the applicant, we would implore you to take a vote tonight. If it's a denial vote, we understand. This is a city annex property. We need to move forward to rezoning as soon as possible. We have a series of things lined up. There are questions to answer. There's new questions tonight. They will be answered. This developer will not do something dangerous. It's not in their best interest.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Will not accept.
Will not be doing something dangerous. If there is truly merit to questions raised tonight that we haven't heard, we will be investigating them. Nobody has a more significant interest in creating a safe and welcoming and insightful development than the developer. So we will continue to work on these things. We have to have a decision tonight. I understand your interest in sending it back or spending more time on it. We will be going forward to the City Commission if it's up to us under every scenario at the next opportunity.
So to clarify, and this is probably more for Sandy, if the commission voted for denial, there would be creation of findings of fact related to that denial that would be attached to the rezoning, that would be sent back to the Planning Commission and the City Commission just for their consideration in the furtherance of the development, correct?
Not quite.
Okay, thanks.
Findings of fact would be updated for the zonings.
Got it.
Only that would get reported to the city commissions for their consideration.
Great.
Don't go, Sandy. I need you to tell me that again. So if we deny, what is open, what options are open to the project?
What the applicant has still in process are the rezonings. They have been through the Planning Commission. They have not gone to the City Commission yet. If this vote is for denial, the comprehensive plan is closed. We're done with that. What that means for the zonings is that a memorandum has to get attached that updates the findings of fact for the one finding in the 9 that is related to this specific discussion. And that is what would go to the City Commission with that updated findings of fact.
For the rezoning.
For the rezoning only.
So our conversation that we've had tonight would be part of what would be weighed for rezonings, but would not terminate the project in and of itself.
That is correct.
And to put a point on it and make sure that I'm clearly understanding the point as you articulate it, you said there's not about 9 findings of fact on those rezone, give or take, maybe.
There, depending on which zoning, there are 9 to 10 findings of fact. For the residential, there are 9. For the commercial, there are 10.
Got it, thank you. So and you talked about, you listed multiple rezoning applications are in process. So it's one point of many points on each of those, right, to be weighed. And it doesn't equal an automatic denial of those rezonings or a complete barrier to moving forward with the project. There are theoretically other ways to have approvals given that would allow for some level of mitigated building in the places that they want to build in that's currently designated as open space, if all of those other things from the FEMA approval to all the city commission approvals were to move forward.
There are many approvals that are still required. So the land use entitlements are not granted at this point in time. There are many high hurdles for the applicant to still clear.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. Thank you for articulating that. I just really wanted to put a point on that. And to Commissioner Kelly's point earlier, to say to the public who is engaged in this in recent days and weeks, but mostly in recent days because it became, public news for folks. There is a lot of other parts to this process in this theoretical project and a lot of other processes to pay attention to beyond this particular one. So I think that's something that this commission really values, is always trying to clarify and pay attention to process and how one process might impact another or several others and how significant the impact of that is. So I appreciate maybe we're driving the point home a little too much, but I think it's helpful to articulate that.
Really appreciate the clarification you've given us, Sandy, because that was different from my understanding when we came in, was that, a yes was full speed ahead and no, to still go to the other pieces at the city, but that a no completely finished off the project, which is not my interest. I want to see that node developed outside of the floodplain. I would even give up some edges on there to make sure that there's enough land to make that useful. It's just a very significant change for me for the comprehensive plan because of the open space question. But it sounds like we can still inform the process without shutting down the process. I'm getting more comfortable. Would you like to weigh in anything, or are you done?
Yeah, I don't love this project. I want to say, I understand the benefits to it, and I value open space, I value floodplain, but I don't think we have the plans in place yet. And I feel like, if we vote to deny, I'm going to vote against that. Even though I wish we had more value placed on open space, and I wish we had more value placed on the floodplain. But I am a nut for process, and we haven't got those plans in place yet. And this is city annex land, so I think we owe it to them and to do right by them.
Do we have anyone who wants to make a motion, or should I? Okay. I move to deny the comprehensive plan amendment, CPA 23-00186, and adopt and rather not adopt the joint city ordinance number 10020 / county resolution number 24-04, recognizing that becomes then a recommendation to the city, and they can move forward with other pieces.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed?
Nay.
All right, we have our vote. Thank you, everyone. Give folks a minute to kind of, if they would like to leave, they can. We will move on to appointments, and I believe we do have some.
Yes,
I don't have
Commissioners.
them in front of me just yet.
I do. You have some reappointments to the Senior Resource Commission. Rosemary Chapin and Ed Schulte.
Has anyone had an opportunity to speak with either of those or feel the need to, or interested in making a motion?
I think since they are reappointments, I don't feel the need to visit with them. So I'm happy to make a motion to appoint Rosemary Chapin. We probably ought to do these separately for position 2 on the Senior Resource Center.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I'll make a motion to appoint Ed Schulte for position 3 to the Senior Resource Center.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
And I would like to talk to Stephanie. I think it's Davis. You had it in our
it is
minute,
Davis.
David. I would like to talk to Stephanie. I expect that she'll want to re-up there since that's a specific thing per district. If you all would give me a little more time, I'd appreciate it.
Understand.
Was there another
Have
one?
Fire District 2.
Okay.
Some reappointments for Fire District 2. A new appointment of Joe Holschler, who is our former interim director of emergency management. Love Joe. And Chris Maley would like to be reappointed to District 2.
Thanks for that summary. Sarah, I'll go ahead and make those motions. I move to appoint Joe Holscher to the Fire District number 2.
Second. All in favor?
Aye. And I'll move to appoint Chris Maley to Fire District number 2 also.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Almost filled in for you there.
We do still have one vacant position for Fire District number 3, and I think there's some conversations in the works, but not ready to make one yet. Are there any others that are ready? None? Okay. Okay, with that, we move to Commissioner or Administrator Miscellaneous. So Sarah.
Thanks, Commissioners. My memo is attached. There are some new dates being added that I want to call to your attention. There's a behavioral health court graduation in Division 2 on the 15th that's been added that's new, and so the 2024 presidential preference primary, 3 Ps, the canvas has been scheduled for that on Wednesday, March 27th at 9 a.m. I just got that date today from the clerk's office, so if you can't make that, please let me know, and I can either see if they can move it or if we can find a substitute for the presidential preference primary. And then, Commissioners, we've got a couple of different things attached, including our weeks 3 and 4 of the legislative policy reports from Little Government Relations. Next week, you do have the much discussed work session on open space at 4 o'clock. And then we have a work session planned for the 21st on the update on the Judicial Law Enforcement Center design. And Commissioners, that's all I have.
Commissioners, do you have any miscellaneous items you'd like to discuss?
No.
Okay, with that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for being here.